Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, along with our co-host tonight, Ilja Semjonovs. And he's still working on pronouncing his last name. Give us a shot, Coach.
No, that's getting better. That's
Let me hear you say it.
I'm going to sing it. Semjonov.
Semjonov. It's a Slavic name. You can just say son of a... Oh, we have to edit that. I'll keep this thing clean, G-rated. It's great to have Ilja visiting up here in the mountains, Wintergreen Resort, Wintergreen, Virginia. And I've known Ilja almost 10 years now. And dedicated guy, great passion for the game. What we're going to do tonight is talk to Andy Durham. Andy Durham wrote me he wrote an email by English. I used to speak English. He sent me an email. And we're both big fans, students of Bill Jacobson. And his email is about supporting his recommendation for Bill Jacobson for the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Bill Jacobson is the founder of Compu-Tennis, the godfather of electronic charting, brilliant mind. I was fortunate to spend a lot of time with Bill. I think next to Vic Braden, I can't think of anybody. I'd have Bill number 2 as far as this guy's got some information. Amazing what he brought to the game. So we'll talk about Andy Durham, his journey in tennis. Also to Bill Jacobson, and then the project Andy has going to try to bring stats more to the forefront, especially at the grassroots level. Okay, so let's give him a shout. Andy Durham, podcast 189. Here we go.
Yeah, hi.
Andy, welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. Thanks for being a guest. Ilja and I are ready to ask you some questions. We'll get this going. Now, we generally start with what type of baby food did you like when you were a kid? But tell us how, just get it rolling. We said we're going to have 3 parts, your journey in tennis, Bill Jacobson, and then racket stats. So tell us, how did you get connected with tennis?
My brother and I found our dad's rackets in the closet. So we thought, oh, what the heck? So we went out and we found some old balls around, so we started hitting them. And through the course of the summer, we broke all the windows in the garage and everything else. And it kind of progressed from there. My brother and I kind of grew up together. We had no lessons other than, I think my grandmother gave me one for Christmas or something, but that was it. So we were self-taught. And in hindsight, there are an awful lot of us, at least my age, that grew up that way. And I think it certainly focuses you on doing the best you can do as an individual. And of course, it gave me a great appreciation for the tennis players that are coming out today that have sort of unique strokes, Medvedev's forehand and all that. And I think as a player and as a coach, I got used to that sort of thing. So it doesn't bug me when someone doesn't have a perfect stroke, because I know they're using what they want to use. But anyway, so I was a high school player, didn't play in college. I was not that good, but I loved it. And I was a hack. I was a great hack.
Where did you and your brother grow up?
Indiana.
Basketball country.
Yeah, we were all into basketball, but when spring hit, we were into tennis through the summer and all that. So it was tough because there was really nothing around. There were no teaching pros. There were 4 concrete courts down by the university that we get on, and the only people to hit with are the older players. And I think, like Ivan said, or Ilja said, nobody would hit with us because we were so bad for a while, and then we got better, and then they didn't want to play us because we beat them. So anyway, so that was the beginning of it. And I didn't play in college, but I played hack in college. And it was when I got out that I was teaching 4th grade. And at the same time, I was in Columbus, Indiana, where Ken DeHart's from.
Oh, I've met Ken.
You know Ken?
Yeah, his son came to one of our training sessions. It was many years ago now. Let me back up a little bit. Ken DeHart done a lot of great things. I know part of the PTR family way back when, and to this day. How your brother, older, younger? How many years apart?
Year and a half. He's younger. So
built-in practice partner.
Yeah. So we had lots lots of go-ats, lots of fights when we were little, and it was pretty even. I think he was a better athlete than I was. But anyway, we taught each other. We basically just kind of learned and watched the other players and did the best we could. But anyway, when I was in Columbus, one of there was a boy who was 16 who was ranked highly in the state, and they needed a practice partner because even there they didn't have a lot of players. So I hit with him, and then the summertime came, and his father wanted to take the kids on vacation, the family on vacation. So he said, "Hey, why don't you come down and take over my classes?" I'm going, "Yeah, like crazy." Anyway, he said, "Come down, take a look, and I'll show you what to do." So I went down there, and of course, there's like a zillion kids all over the courts. Balls are flying everywhere. It was crazy. And I thought, heck, I think I could probably match this. So I took it over. Anyway, after the 2 weeks of doing that, I decided I was going to teach tennis, and I was teaching 10 to 12 hours a day. I just loved it. That's how I got into the basics of teaching.
Let me one more question now back. What about indoor time? Did you play in the wintertime? You and your brother?
Yeah, we played. We shoveled the snow off the courts, and even in high school, it was in February or so when there was tons of snow, so everybody laughed at us. But we shoveled the courts, got one court free, and then got another court free, and we started hitting. So there was no indoor tennis.
High school tennis in your day, was it girls in the fall, boys in the spring?
There were no girls at this school. I was up in Massachusetts. It was an all boys school at that point. Now it's co-ed, but so it was just us guys. And I played squash in the wintertime, squash and basketball to stay in shape.
Okay, so you went from Indiana up to Massachusetts for high school.
Yeah.
What was the name of the high school?
Lawrence Academy.
Oh, okay, in New Jersey, right?
Well, no, that's Lawrenceville.
Lawrenceville. Okay.
Lawrence is in Groton, Massachusetts, where Groton Academy is. And my senior year, I was the captain of the team. Played number 6 in singles and number 1 in doubles. And our team won 86% of all the sets we played. We screamed everybody. So we went undefeated. We were the only tennis team ever to go undefeated at Lawrence. And we played the likes of Exeter and Andover, but we played like their B teams. We didn't play their A teams, of course.
Right.
But we were really fortunate. We had a solid team all the way down.
I think of tennis. I think of Lawrenceville because I remember I went to prep school in New England, Kimball Union Academy, and we played. I was a hockey player, played Exeter, Andover, those schools. But we went to a tournament. I couldn't remember. It was amazing how many tennis courts they had at Lawrenceville. So you're a boarding student?
Yep, I was a boarding student.
Yeah, so you learned some discipline.
Yeah. Well, I went to a military academy that my grandfather attended before that, so I had all the discipline I needed.
All right. I never realized Ken DeHart was from Indiana.
Yeah, he's from Columbus originally, and the funny thing is, years later, I never knew him when he was here because he'd already moved to California by then. But when I found out that I wanted to teach, I spent another year teaching 4th grade in the wintertime. And then that spring, I decided to go to Tennis University, which Dennis Vandermeer ran. It was his second. And would you believe that's where I met Ken DeHart?
And many other people.
Yeah, 1972. The class was fairly small, but Dennis was just as terrific as usual. And it was a 2-week course back then.
I remember that. I'm going to be 70. How old are you?
77.
77. With Dennis, where was that held in 1972?
Lake Tahoe.
Lake Tahoe. Wow. I know that was before he went to Hilton Head. Hilton Head wasn't his base at that time, so it was always traveling.
Oh, no. It was years before that, because remember he went to Sweetbriar and used that as the base for a lot of the camps.
Yeah,
and then
Sweetbriar is not in Lynchburg. It's near Lynchburg. It's not very far from where we are right now in Virginia. And what a treat! I went there 3 summers where it was Dennis was there, Jim Verdick, and Jim Lair. Amazing.
Yeah. And, the funny thing, along with, Vic Braden and Dennis, and later on we'll talk about Bill Jacobson, but things seem to happen in bundles. And when you take tennis, for instance, and you look at what happened in the early 70s, and all of a sudden you got a Vic Braden, you got a Dennis Van der Meer, you've got, instead of Welby Van Horn, you've got all these people jumping in, and then Jim Lair and Jack Groppel, et cetera. And it just all of a sudden just exploded.
Yeah, it was a fun time. Actually, we're more on the ball hopper side, Ilya and myself, but on the briefcase side, Dennis, what a sharp guy. He, at Sweetbriar, they had 6 courts, and Dennis said, well, I'll mortgage and I'll build 6 more courts. I just need to have a couple dormitories and access to a cafeteria. But that was a beautiful place to go in the summer with Dennis.
Wasn't it, though?
Jim Lair has said that, he was a guest on our podcast, is that, people really needed to see Dennis in person. There's all sorts of things, like we have a lot of content online, but it's much different when you go like bricks and mortars when you're in person. But Dennis Van der Meer, the corrective measures, the group dynamic skills. Actually, I know we'll get into charting, but Dennis was a front runner. I can remember Eddie Parker, who's actually from Virginia. He taught me how to use a CT 120. But tell us more. You went overseas. You got the point. But let's go in the 4th grade. What was that like? Were you trained to be a school teacher?
Yeah, I was in elementary. I was trained to be a teacher, and because I love teaching, and that's probably why I never made a great tennis player, because my thoughts are on the other side of the court, so to speak. I love working with kids, and I love working with people, and teaching just seemed to fit me. But boy, when you put together teaching with the passion like I have for tennis and like you have, it's unbeatable. With
Dennis, certainly his group dynamic skills. He talked about, of course, his parents were missionaries, but also the South African Army. But he used to tell tennis teachers to go watch elementary school teachers. Go watch people deal with large groups and how to, just to get the kids in line to go to the cafeteria. That's a challenge. What was your favorite age group? Were you stuck in the 4th grade, or did you go up and down?
I just taught. The funny thing is, after I graduated from college, I just spent 1 year doing that.
Oh, okay.
And then tennis got in the way. So I haven't looked back, and I had some of my 4th grade students come and visit me when I was in New Orleans or someplace, and it was nice to see them all grown up, see what they turned out to be like. But that's one of the benefits of teaching anything, is that you've probably got 3rd generation people that you taught the parents, and I won't date you by saying grandparents, but you're getting close to that.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, you mentioned Vic Braden. He taught the 6th grade. He didn't do it very long, but he filmed everything. And then years later, he had a reunion. And so 25 years later, and some of the 6th graders had not picked a racket up since, but he had the footage. And he used to always talk about the brain, and that they were programmed, and they were the ones that didn't continue make improvements. They played during this phys ed class that he taught. Well, he was teaching 6th grade in general, but teaching the PE unit of tennis for 6 weeks. You said that, they were locked in. They had not played for 25 years, and they filmed again. But no, I think to have that background in education, and even though it was a year, you must have had to do some pre-work as far as when getting your certificates and degrees and such to be prepared for that.
Well, I actually started off as a physics major, and then my professor brought me in and says, "Andy, why do you want to major in physics?" And I said, "Oh, I want to study the stars. I want to do all this great stuff." And he said, "Well, I hate to tell you, but physics is currently dead, because until we get a bigger accelerator, CERN had not been built yet." So he said, until we get something like that, there's not going to be any chops, and you won't be able to prove or disprove anything. So, so I switched, and I went over to, I was a pilot at that point, so I wanted to fly commercial airlines. And then Vietnam let out, and the pilots were flooded. They were flooded by all the Army and Air Force pilots. So I had to switch again, and I ended up graduating in arts. And the teaching degree came, it wasn't a degree. I had actually spent part of a year substitute teaching in the Indianapolis school system. And boy, you think teaching's tough. Try substitute teaching.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's I was one of those kids who would read it pretty quickly and fool around more if it was a substitute teacher.
You get by with all sorts of things. But I mean, it taught me a lot about the kids. I mean, we had one kid there who took all his books home and he was failing everything. And so I asked one of his buddies once, I said, what? He takes his books home. What happens? He said, he said, he goes home and there's an uncle there or something like that. So he goes down to the pool hall till midnight and then comes back again. So, I mean, there are all sorts out there. There's quite a life on the inner city.
You mentioned Vietnam War. I'm from the age group, we Americans, we'd all sit in front of the TV, Ilya, and your birthday would be pulled out of a hat. And my birthday came up as an early number, but my birth year, they dropped the draft. But one of the reasons that the Aussies were so good in tennis in the 50s and 60s, we had, Stan Smith and Arthur Ashe, both U.S. Wimbledon champions, but they stayed at school for a draft deferment, so they wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. But the Aussies, they were not dropping out of school necessarily, but they were going straight to the world tour and traveling, playing full-time tennis, where the Americans took a much slower route because of there was no withdrawing from school.
Mm-hmm.
No, you could
go ahead.
The Aussies could get out of school at 16, which is what most of them did.
Yeah. And how about yourself during the Vietnam War? You were in school at that time?
Yeah, I was in school, and because I was in school, I was deferred. And when the draft came along, which was my senior year, I actually was 312 or something, way up there. So I didn't have to go. My brother did go and served over there for a number of years. He was in the Air Force for 37 years. So, yeah, he did his full stint. So, but I didn't. Yeah, I was left to pursue my tennis career.
And we certainly try to stay close to tennis with the politics and the left going further to the left and the right going further to the right. But when you and I were kids, every night with Walter Cronkite, there was a count of how many Americans had died. Really, just would be told almost on a daily basis. Just terrible.
Yeah, I suppose we're going through a sad period now, but that was a very sad period at that point too.
Yeah, I heard someone say just
split
today,
the nation right down the middle.
Yeah, I heard someone say just today that we've had bad times before. We're right now having bad times. Hopefully things can come back together. But back to tennis. So tell us, you went to the tennis university, and what type of impact did that have on you?
Oh, that really opened up my eyes, because remember, I wasn't a very good player anyway, and not only did it help me out as a player because it gave me a lot of goals on strokes and things, but the point is that Dennis had this unique ability to make teaching simple. With his standard method. Of course, there are others in the industry that poo-pooed that at the point, but you know what? I use that even today. You break down a stroke and it's in one of those different areas, and you can be real nitpicky if you want, but 99% of all the people that most of us work with are never going to get to that point. It's, they need as much help as they can, and you just got to figure it out. But he was brilliant at simplifying, the teaching method, just like Jim Lehr was incredibly gifted at putting together sports psychology so that people could understand it, almost like a 1, 2, 3 thing that you could work off of.
Yeah, no, with Dennis, Braden used to say this, there's basically respect and resentment, and so many people perhaps it was jealousy, not respect Dennis. Then certainly in our corner of the world, I spent time with both of them, a great deal of time. But with Braden, I remember Vic was very curious, because by the time I was 26, I had been trained by Welby Van Horn and Dennis, and then Vic as well. And there was so many more similarities than there were differences between Braden and Vandermeer. And I would just tell people, I said, well, I just don't think you know. You have to watch both of them work. And I think it's kind of like the conversation on the GOAT, the greatest of all time. I don't really like those conversations great is great, a legend's a legend. And the Vandermeer, we're going to try to do that tonight with you, with Bill Jacobson. We'd like to try to carry the torch from tennis teachers from the past. One of our contributors on this podcast, someone who spent a lot of years with Dave Anderson, has this great theme, is Back to the Future. Because what was going on in tennis, Alcaraz, if people watch closely and how he hits the ball, it's all there, the nuts and bolts. Fundamentals are fundamentals.
Well, the fundamental thing is you got to get your racket to the ball at the right time with the right face, and no matter how you do it, if you can do it, you're okay.
Right.
It could be that. It could be that simple. There's a guy. I was talking about a term. I can't remember his name last year, and he was beating the daylights out of everybody, and he never used anything but slice off both sides. There's a college player, I think Division II.
Yeah,
he used nothing but.
There's a player. There's a player from every era. I think of. I had these young kids hitting balls today, and to get them to breathe, I was at them to go, Roger, who? Roger's only been retired a short period of time. I had these other two girls. I said, if you do really well, there's like 3 kids, 10 and under. I said, if you really two girls and 1 boy. I said, you do really well. I said, I'm going to let you have your photo taken with this young man. And then I said, who would you rather have your photo taken with? This kid's name's Matthew. Matthew or Roger? These 2 girls screaming, Roger. So from that, just having the kids hit the ball and saying, Roger who? Go ahead, keep rolling here.
Yes. Anyway, they were both brilliant men, but they didn't actually appear to be a know-it-all. They presented things in such a way that, that in Vic's case, it was funny, and he was breaking down, he was criticized because his methodology and scientific methodology wasn't as everybody thought, but he was right.
Yeah.
He was totally right. But I remember, Dennis was famous for remembering strokes and names and that sort of thing. And he put this beautiful package of the standard method and the organization and what it was all about together. And Vic, on the other hand, his mind was so curious. He looked at everything and he examined it in detail, but he made it look simple. For instance, just a testimony to him. I saw him in his last speaking engagement down in Florida before he passed away. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, hey, I went to Coto de Casa, and I can't remember the second class or whatever. And he says, oh yeah, that was April such and such to this. And I go, what? I couldn't even remember that. What a brilliant mind both of them were.
Yeah, for sure. I was fortunate to, spend so much time with both, and you certainly, that's what we try to do is we say we're a system of systems. You could take Vandermeer progressions. When Vic, when he came on the scene and said, hey, you need to close your racket face on the forehand, like you said, he was right. But it used to be racket on edge. You would penny on edge. You'd shake hands at the backswing and you'd shake hands on the follow through. So it's a 180-degree swing on a 20-degree court. I have some collector's items. I have quite a few books. But one is I have films of Vic teaching back in the 60s. And, people would say, gee, Vic used to say peel the orange on the volley. But what he would say is that once you know the logic and the science, you change. It's just once it's proven to be a better way. But yeah, I think what you said, his intellectual curiosity was just nonstop.
Yeah, and then of course there are people around like today, but today we're inundated in so many directions with so many opinions, and I think we're it's kind of interesting. I have a doctor that took lessons with me, and every week he would come in and say, hey, Andy, I want to work on this because I saw this on YouTube. I'm going,
YouTube.
okay. Yeah.
YouTube research. How's it go? YouTube clips are like potato chips. You can't have one,
Yeah.
and they just keep going deeper and deeper. And what Vic said before he passed, I think the internet's getting close to 35 years old. But Vic passed away in 2014. Be 10 years in October. Vic, you say about the internet, so much bad information is going out so fast. And forever we struggled with the consumer for the most part. They don't have consumer knowledge. And then a lot of the pros, they don't have product knowledge. So then it just becomes a crazy, crazy, weird, wild, wacky world of the tennis industry. But it's a great sport. But I do think that what Dennis did with uniformity, the standard method, and people, and I'm a member of the PTR, USPTA was a tester of both. But can we agree that tennis courts are rectangle? Can we agree, like you said, should the strings face the target? If the strings are facing the ground, the ball will not go over the net. Yeah.
Yeah. What was Vic's thing? Yeah, he says close the face on the racket, and when you hit the ball, you hit yourself on the foot.
Yeah. So from there, with your education with Dennis, mostly in club tennis, which you've been.
When I finished, I had an opportunity to go up to Philadelphia and work as a pro north of Philadelphia. And not only, and I'd stay in practice every night because remember, I was a terrible player. So I thought, well, maybe I'm going to use this. Dennis inspired me to really work on my game, which wasn't hard to do because I wanted to do it anyway. So I would teach in the daytime, and then at night they let me close the club, and I'd stay out there and use their Prince ball machine to work on whatever I happened to be working on. I started playing tournaments, and I started doing a lot better and stuff. And about that time, I had met with a company called Delrec out of Philadelphia, and they were in the business. They were one of the first companies to start doing management of tennis clubs. They didn't have anybody actually who knew tennis, but they knew business. And so they went at it from the business. And so I got locked in with them, and they said, hey, we got a job opportunity. You can be the head pro down in Washington, D.C. And I said, oh, that sounds good. So I went down there to Mount Vernon Tennis World and took over everything there and built programs up, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a father and a son who happened to be teaching next to me week after week after week. And the dad was running the kid through drills that he got out of a book and that sort of thing. And eventually he came over to me and he said, hey, I like the way you're teaching. And he says, could you help me with my kid here? And I said, sure. And I think all tennis pros that are worth anything take on kids that maybe can't afford lessons and stuff on a regular basis. So what we worked out a deal is that they would pay for one lesson a week, and I would show them what to do and give the dad and the kid homework, and they go away and then come back the next week. So what I found out is working with parents, regardless of what I know their negative experiences, but if you educate them and bring them on board, 99% of the time they're with you, and they understand that you're controlling what's going on, and they enjoy that because you're giving them a useful role. Now, not every parent wants that, but I love working with parents. Anyway, so after 1 year of working with this kid, I realized that the time had come. Of course, back then, what was the saying? The only coach who can take a player to Wimbledon is a previous Wimbledon player.
Right.
and it's funny because Vic was a great component, and so is Dennis. You learn your stuff. You can coach anybody. Don't be afraid to get out there with anybody. And you don't have to be as good a player as them, but you got to know what you're doing. Anyway, so I decided that since I was not a very good player, I took a year and a half off, and I played the US Penn circuit. I went over to England, played the pre-Wimbledon qualifiers, and I just played to get an idea of what was going on. This was in the Brad Druitt, Bill Scanlon days.
Yeah.
Where fitness is going to a party after you play. That's fitness, and drinking beer.
Right.
and kids are living in tents and sleeping bags on the ground. And, a lot of them were pretty good players. But anyway, I learned a ton doing that. And then all the time I was still working with the kid and the parents kind of by remote. And when I got back, I started working with them, and I moved to New Orleans. And I would fly from New Orleans to Las Vegas like once every 2 weeks, just continue working with us and give the dad homework. And then we talk at night and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the kid got to be number 4 in the world that way. So if somebody, and it's the dad and the kid, it wasn't me. I just kind of gave them a direction. But wow, was that an experience?
Yeah. Who's the player?
Joey Blake.
Okay.
Aaron Crickstein.
Met Joey Blake.
Okay. It was the Aaron Crickstein era.
Yeah.
John Karras out of Michigan. Arias was after them, but and so was Andre was right after him, out of Las Vegas. It was a marvelous experience, and it showed me. It really opened up a lot of doors for me. So consequently, I quit my job in New Orleans and moved to England because people in England were starting to send people to me, and I just said, well, I'll go over there instead. So I went over there, and we ran. I don't call them PTR courses. I just ran them as pro courses because we invited anybody to come in. And of course, we had an advantage in doing it that way and marketing that way because the LTA would not even let you become a coach unless you were at least a county level player. So I got a lot of people who were like me. They were hackers. And of course, I love hackers. I'm one of them. So it was a nice marriage, and we brought in probably about 300 people to the PTR because I always like having a test at the end of one of the courses just so they pay more attention. And so we ran the PTR test, and so I certified them and got them in members and all this sort of thing. And of course, then we came to heads with the LTA, who didn't like that sort of thing. We were the only ones other than Adrian Stonebridge to be running courses that were not LTA certified. But eventually I ended up working with Charlie Applewhite, which I think you mentioned that you knew, who's the director of coaching. We wrote some books together. We did some teaching and stuff together. And so I ended up working a lot with the LTA over there until the recession hit. And that's when I came back to the States.
Where, Andy, were you stationed or were you based in England?
I was based out of Hemel Hempstead, which is northwest up toward Watford.
Yeah.
So I stayed with my sponsor for a number of years and worked out of there. We formed a small company to go around called International Tennis Services, and we did clinics for adults, kids, all over England. And what a wonderful experience that was. I'd gone over in '76. Remember when I quit my job and started play? Well, I ended up playing over there and playing all the tournaments that had come after Wimbledon at that time, and enjoyed that. But I also enjoyed going around as a coach and bringing these people together on all these different kinds of courts. Teaching in England isn't outdoors particularly. It's not like over here. I remember going up near Watford. There was a club there, West Ham Tennis Club, and I went out in the morning and the sun was shining and the grass was beautiful and everything. It was nice. Well, then it started getting cloudy, and as the day went on, drizzle started to fall, and by about 3:00, it started sleeting, and then it snowed. So my last lessons, anybody's been to England know you don't cancel a lesson no matter what. And so we ended up having sliding contests in the sleet. So,
no, we actually have a coach here, Lawrence Hyde, studying now, and we've had a couple others from England here just in the last couple months. And yeah, it's hard. I've only been in England once in the wintertime. I've been there many, many times in the summer, but it's that cold, wet weather. But they're not canceling lessons. But back when you were there weren't that many indoor courts, correct?
No. I happened to be the director of tennis at one of the first big ones other than David Lloyd's, and that was down in Chiswick at the Riverside Club. And it was 8 indoor courts, and we had 12 outdoor, swimming pool, fitness rooms, squash courts, physical therapy rooms. It was designed to be an American, what they termed an American country club. Well, it was a lot more than most country clubs are over here. But anyway, it was a real hit. It taught me, I'll tell you, it's an interesting story behind that, because before the club opened, how do you market and sell stuff? So what we did was we built, when they started building this thing, we also built 2 real temporary tennis courts out by the porta cabins where we met people and explained what it was all about. And we offered a free hour lesson. And after the free hour lesson, they could take a tour. Well, we did that through the whole winter before it actually opened. And when it actually opened, we were like 88% sold out of memberships.
Wow.
People love to see something being built. I'll tell you, they just love it.
With it's building a player too. That's the thing we need to get to, is that that becomes a little bit abstract. I don't think that people all these years later are agreeing on how do you build a player. I can remember being told, I was born in 1954, so it was easy for me to remember. But the LTA, I believe it was between 1954 and 1981, they had made no changes to the curriculum. It's hard to believe, especially at the time, because when James Van Allen invented the tiebreaker in 1970, and tennis was booming, it was on TV, and but the Brits, they weren't really tuned into initially to Dennis and Vic and what they were doing as pioneers.
No, not at all. They're and that, I mean, we're getting into a little bit of politics, but that's the problem with having one organization orchestrate the entire industry, is that it man-coddles, it controls every bit of it, not from the coaching side, from the playing side, who gets chosen for all it's all incestuous. And I love our...
Yeah, that's well put. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love the idea that we've got the PTR and the USPTA. Totally different philosophies, both successful. And, that's right. Well, now all of a sudden, we have the LTA, the USTA getting involved in coaching certifications. And so, here we go, we're a mishmash. Well, which one do I go to? If I were a young pro today, I don't know which one I would go to. It's a difficult move, but it's also, anyway, that's the problem we had with the LTA over there, is that we were not recognized. And before you could even teach on a public facility there, you had to have a LTA certification. Our certification did nothing for you.
Well, that sounds like the battles that Ilja and I are encountering, that what we do is not recognized. But you think you just have to work towards that. I think what you said about the USPTA and PTR, it's like with competition. If McDonald's goes on one corner, pretty soon Burger King is going to be on the other corner, vice versa. The governing body of tennis, I mean, so many in this country, the USTA, a lot of great people, a lot of great causes, and they have all those courts in one zip code down in Lake Nona. That's actually where Ilja and his wife live. It'd be interesting, they just made it the Wild Wild West and said, you can just come in and rent courts. If you have students, you can come in and rent courts. And in some places in Europe, that's the way it's done. If you want to teach, you pay for the courts and you bring the students. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and of course the other philosophy that is a little different is that Ilja would certainly be able to say something about this, but the training of kids in Europe is a little different than here. You work in teams, you travel together. Of course, the countries are a lot smaller, so you can get to it. I remember asking, what's the difference with Spanish tennis? And you could say the same thing for Italian tennis now. But I mean, why did all of a sudden it come from nowhere? And the answer was that at one point, tournaments were all held in big places far away from everywhere. And you had to get in a car and go travel. So what they did was they changed it so they encouraged every small tennis club to run their own tournaments. And the kids who, did well on those may have to ride their bike to get to the next one or get traveling. But they all ran small tournaments, so they offered the kids competition. And, of course, I think that's where, in many respects, we lack. We train a lot, but we don't actually play a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one great thing about the French system. Dave Fish, it was Dave Howell really in this country put together UTR, and Dave Fish launched it. And it was supposed to be genderless and ageless at first, and it was, where you could get on your do the Wayne Bryan thing. Can you walk to the around the block and play somebody? Can you get on your bike and play somebody? We just have to have more tennis being played. I do think that kids can get programmed out and they don't play enough sets. For sure.
No, they don't. I can't remember. I was listening to something a couple of months ago, and this was somebody from either Spain or France, and they were saying, "Well, we play a set in the morning, a set in the afternoon every day. I mean, by the end of the week, we play 8-10 sets. Yeah. And how many sets do the players play here during a week?"
Well, and one thing too is years ago, in the U.S., kids would just take private lessons if they were lucky, and of course there was no non-traditional scheduling. There's no homeschooling, so there were certainly summer camps, but kids would hit the backboard all the time. You'd hang out at a tennis park, and a lot of times if you hit the backboard, and some, I just feel strongly that some kids are better off hitting the backboard than taking lessons. At least the ball's got to come back to you, and you're going to simplify your mechanics. Certainly, a lot of the boys, especially, they try to knock the ball down with a 2-ounce ball. But yeah, I think that's gone away. Some facilities are not even building backboards anymore, don't have backboards.
Oh, yeah. Try and find one. I mean, when I traveled the USDA Penn Circuit, I couldn't find a backboard. So the first thing I did, because it was in the summertime, I'd head for the local school. And of course, if you hit off a brick wall there's no mortar between some of the bricks. And so the ball could go anywhere. But I'll tell you, I love those schools.
Yeah, I tell parents, I said, well, it's not a dark alley generally, but it's not the safest place to go behind a grocery store. But generally, you go behind a grocery store, you can find a good wall to hit against. But you can hit, you can, if you're good and you get to a certain level, you can hit against a dumpster.
That's right.
But just find a way to hit balls. And I think back when you and I were kids, the one thing that we didn't have is the choice of the TV was called an idiot box. So we certainly wasted some hours sitting in front of a TV. But now a kid can just basically the idiot box is in their pocket. And back when you and I were kids, it wasn't 3 stations. And back when you and I were kids, it was only cartoons on Saturday morning. Now, now it's 24/7, 365. With when you came back from England, tell us about that. You came back from England, and where'd your career go from there?
Well, I ended up going from Virginia to Massachusetts, and then down to Central Florida, and that's where I spent the last 20 years. Was down there in a small town called Auburndale, which is midway between near Winter Haven and Lakeland.
Yeah.
But anyway, and so I continued using that. And of course, when the computer broke down, I said, oh my goodness. So that's when I started looking at apps, because by then, this would have been 1990, 2018 or so when it broke down. Anyway, smartphones were all over the place. Everybody had them. Sophisticated systems were set up, and there were lots of apps out there. So I tried them, and that's where I decided to go ahead and do my own. And I based it, of course, on Bill's. I asked Bill if he would mind if I did that, and he said, certainly not. He said, he said, good luck. He said, but I put everything in terms of competence. I've all put it away in the vault, so to speak, and it's all say away. So I can't really offer any assistance on it. I said, that's fine. I got all your manuals. I got everything else. Let me see what I can come up with. So anyway, that was the beginning of Racket Stats.
With before we get into that, Central Florida, I remember calling you up, and you were very helpful. I was at Hillsborough Community College for many, many years. The Olsons, with Earl Olson.
Yeah.
I've taught a lot of Olsons. Earl Olson was there forever, and he was a student at our program in Tyler, Texas, Tyler Junior College. So was Sam Olson later on. But so there was 4 courts in the back, where the clay courts, and they were having a problem with drainage. And that was, I want to have you just touch upon USTA. You were very supportive, and I went to. I was directed to go to you, and you were very helpful, and gave me a lot of insight. And the USTA matched what the college put forth. The college put forth, I think it was $75,000. The college matched that. And then Chad Burial, who was working with me at the time, he's gone on to be a very successful college coach. He did the groundwork, So I pulled it off with the money coming in from the USTA and the college, and then what they did is they took the 3 stadium courts in the front instead of the 4 clay courts in the back, and that's where they put the 36-foot courts. One question I have, and I know that concept faded, the 36-foot court, which was a very good indoor model where the court's 36 feet wide, court's 120 feet, so you take one half, it's 60, and you have 3 tennis courts for little kids going east and west, and the court's 36 by 20. So great, again, for indoor courts. Outdoor courts as well. And boy, I wish that was, when you and I were in tennis, we have some photos up, and we used to take, we would, take it from fence to fence, and when you would give lessons, you teach east and west because you had so many people on the court. You wouldn't go north and south, but can those 36-foot courts be pickleball courts? I don't really know the pickleball measurements.
That's a good question. You know what? I'm so far removed from the 36 and pickleball over the last 5 or 6 years. I couldn't tell you. We had some people come over and try playing pickleball on our kids' court, and they had to modify a few things on it. It doesn't match exactly, but I'll tell you what, the ladies that were playing a match that morning, I don't think I ever heard the end of their complaints about the noise. Anyways, fortunately, those people never came back again. They went over to Winter Haven, where Winter Haven had, gave them courts and stuff like that. So they organized over there. But yeah, no, I don't know that the two are compatible exactly, but they're close.
I think they're a little pickleball, but a little bit bigger. You can fit like 6 pickleball ball courts on 2 tennis courts.
Yeah, we'll have to research the math on that. With a tangent for pickleball is, and pickleball, if you can't beat them, join them. So right now it's like, hey, they're one and the same. Learn to play tennis, and you can play pickleball. If you learn to play pickleball, you won't be able to play tennis. So tennis is first, and they are indeed invading our courts. So, but I think, okay, we're getting people out on the court, but use it as an opportunity to teach both sports. But I would tell people, I've heard it's called light tennis, is you take people on a pickleball court, say, no, take a tennis racket and just play with a foam ball. Of course, that doesn't work so well on a windy day. But and then spec tennis, it's a spin-off of paddle tennis that Althea Gibson, Bobby Riggs, Pancho Gonzalez started with. And it's more of a bridge sport, where because of the mallet you use. But tell us about just your take on, I spent so many years in Florida. So you have more years in the game than I do, but I'm up to 50. What comes to your mind when you think, then we'll get on to Bill Jacobson in more detail. What about the Florida scene? What do you think of Florida tennis?
Oh, well, I went down there with the prospect of it being the tennis center of the United States anyway. And actually it's not too far off, but there's so many academies and people setting up shops and doing their own things. And it's hard to get interplay with everybody. These are my students, we're almost back to the 70s. And I find that a little disconcerting. And the fact that most of the tournaments are being pulled to Orlando to get it going. And of course, Orlando is just, wow, what a place. I love the opportunity to work there. But if they're taking tournaments away from the local thing, see, we're undoing what's taken so long. Lakeland used to have a massive series of junior tournaments, and they've lost a number of them. I used to run a high level of junior tournament, and in Auburndale, they'd been there for years, and all of a sudden, it disappeared, and I couldn't get a tournament, there after that. So it pulled a lot of that away. So yeah, so it's a mixed bag of tricks. But tell you, there aren't any tennis players in the world that don't eventually end up there somehow, or
Could
period of time. Or
could you expound upon interplay? I mean, from a club. I mean, intramurals. I mean, local. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's the whole idea of exposing these kids to competition. And, I understand from the academy standpoint, you're trying to do as much of these kids in the daytime as you possibly can. And your time is really limited. But again, and if you're big enough like IMG, then you probably have a number of players who can play each other. But the real art of it is not only just playing the same people over and over again, it's playing a whole bunch of different kinds of people you don't know anything about. And you got to learn to adjust and adapt very quickly. You got 12 games that you can adapt in, or else you're out. So the only time they come into contact with each other is in tournaments. And I wish there was a way that, and I think that Ilja Semjonovs had also expressed that same thing, is that there's so little time, and getting to the academies and training all this is very tough. So it's much easier just to control it locally. And I think Florida, up until recently, had a restriction on U.S.-based players versus foreign players on playing at certain levels. And what it ended up doing was making these incredibly good players play down. So when you take your kids to, a level 6 tournament or level 5, and you end up getting double bageled by some kid from wherever, and it's really a good player. It sort of, it puts a negative stigma on playing tournaments. So we still have trouble getting kids to compete because it's such a rat race. And one of the people we talked about the other day was all the cheating and all this carrying on that's going on in junior tennis. That would put almost all parents off. So they say, I'm not, you can't do that in basketball. You can't do it in football. You can't do it in any of the other sports. Maybe Little League, but you can't do that. And in tennis, it's just parents yelling at kids, parents yelling at other kids. So
when you call it a rat race, it is that, but that's one of the nice things about being up here in the woods, in the mountainside. But it's a point race too. They're chasing points. We always tell people, your game won't get you points won't get you game, but your game will get you points. So you got to play games. You're right. Southern Cal was the only section at one point where the higher level junior tournaments, you'd have to go through some paperwork through their headquarters, but you could bring foreign players in. And what a crazy thing with college tennis, being very much international with so many foreign players. But there was many years where that is one positive of the UTR. One thing, the NTRP, I know that has been a very successful model for club tennis. The 3-5 leagues, the 4-0 leagues, and the 4-5 leagues, the 1-7 rating. But in a lot of ways, that stopped having the veteran match against the youth, the veteran versus youth. Let me just say this, and then you can say a few more things about interplay. I used to say that the 12-year-old kid who's got a headband that matches his racket, it matches his bag, can even match his shoes. So there's some commercialism involved. And they play the mushroom. They play the guy who's 59. He could even be 59 years old and 59 pounds overweight. And he's got a mushroom cap. He's got a band on his elbow, and he's got nothing. He's got nothing, but he can get the ball in the box. He can hack away. And I love your term, hacker. Bud Collins. He was a good player. I think you're downplaying your level of play, but Collins actually won a mixed doubles title. But he used to say, "You hackers out there," when he'd be on a Wimbledon broadcast. But yeah, the mushroom would win. The mushroom would take the role of the spoiler, and the junior is not facing that type of match, and they're just playing somebody else who's trying to bang a forehand as hard as they can. And I know that'll surface when we start talking about stats. But the interplay, I think it's so difficult for people. Juniors don't call people up for matches anymore. And I think also too, the root of all evil is money. Is that a lot of academies, and they do open up like 7-Elevens. There's more academies than there are 7-Elevens in Florida, is a safe bet that, the academies or some coaches are not promoting set play because they're not making money. In some ways it was better when a kid would take one private lesson, find a backboard, do baskets with a friend, and then play mini tennis for a Mountain Dew.
Yep.
But any more thoughts on interplay before we start talking about stats?
No, I mean, like if a lot of these players had played people our age, they'd learn in a hurry what a slice can do. They'd also learn how to volley.
Right.
And they need that. And that's the way we grew up. And who is it? I've talked to players from South America, and who, again, the club was limited to the number of people that could actually get on the court. So the kids were the last ones to be able to get on, and they could hit against the backboard. They could clean the court, do the lines and stuff, but they couldn't play until they got to a certain level, and then they had to be invited. And of course, who did they play? They played the older players. There was no junior program. And so they all got broken in with, older players. And the older players were smart, clever, and had all the shots. And so that's where the flexibility of these little kids came into play. And we don't see that. You're right. We don't see that anymore.
Joel Trucker, the great tennis writer, great tennis mind, he said something on one of our podcasts. Your junior program was the club directory. You just called up and said, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, this is so and so. Could we play a set sometime? Shepard Mead, he wrote the book How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I think it was his 50s. Mm-hmm. It was very popular. And then he wrote another book, How to Succeed in Tennis Without Really Trying. And it was the stretcher versus the spoiler. So the mushroom, maybe not 59 pounds overweight, but definitely with the pot belly and the mushroom cap pulled down and leading with the elbow and no backhand. But he could dink the ball over, bring the kid to the net, make him look into the sun. And, pretty soon the kid would find out, okay, I got to learn to come up to the net. I got to learn to hit an overhead. I got to learn to hit a volley. But I think those days right now are gone. It's really sad.
Yeah, no, because the older players bring such a wealth of information into it, and they don't necessarily look very good. But the point is, they know how to play. I had a student that really looked pretty, took tons of tennis lessons and all that, and he really was a model tennis player. If you visited him, anyway, took him to a tournament where there was a kid on the other side of the court who dragged his racket and wore beat up shoes, and like you're talking. But his kid probably didn't have many lessons at all. But man, the kid could play, and he just ruined this kid, just tore him apart with drop shots and bring him in and lob him or pass him and all these hack shots. Oh boy, you talk about temper tantrums after that match. Woo!
Actually, reflecting at a senior moment, I was going to say with Roger Federer when he would play Fabrizio Santora, he used to tax so much because he hit the slice forehand. And there's always been somebody, like Francois Durr, Vic Braden used to say, because it was her grip. She could choke. She hung onto the backhand like this, but she could choke a bull with two fingers. And she had a palm up serve, pizza position pull down. And of course, back then the players had everybody was taught continental grip, so they definitely had a roll on the forehand. And when they weren't used to ball coming in really slow, so they would struggle. But Pepe Merlo, there's always been players that can find a way where they. I think Santero would be 18 players that ranked number one in a long, long career.
Well, she was marvelous, and of course how do you play them? Because you're not used to that, what they can do with the ball. And they're clever enough and fast enough that they can run down a lot of things. And they always seem to be able to throw back a ball that you can't do an awful lot with somehow. The grip.
For me right now, junior tennis players, when they have to lob, they're looking to hit, 100% of the time, forehand side, backhand side, they're trying to hit a top spin lob winner. They don't realize, okay, I'm going to get the opponent back, make them hit an overhead back, close to the baseline, and then they're going to hit a weak overhead, then I can transition. They don't understand that.
And I think one of the other, criticisms that I would have is that I think a lot of players have the player taken out of them so that they can look good, so they have the correct strokes. And that's not always, you take the heart of a person out of anything. And first of all, they may not ever adapt to it, and they don't have to. Medvedev's forehand, for instance. Look at Agassi. I mean, look at all these screwy players that don't have perfect strokes, and look how well they do. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. And I think one of the dangers today is that everybody's overtaught.
Yeah, with Agassi, Braden has a tape. He's interviewing Agassi, and he said, you get somebody so far out of the court, why don't you come to the net? And Agassi said, have you seen me volley? Most of the top players, Medvedev, he's great at it, is that they're honest. Medvedev, if you want to look at YouTube clips of interviews, not the court side where they're passing out the trophy and the check, but, he goes, my volleys are terrible, but they're getting better. Or he goes, I can't play on clay, but I'm getting better. Oh, and last year I actually won in Rome. Let's turn to Bill Jacobson. I think it's great. I mentioned that before we came, or in the intro of this podcast, that you sent me the email on trying to get him in the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Classy guy,
yes.
A gentleman, soft-spoken, South African, genius. To me, he's a name like with Vic and Dennis, who are both in the Hall of Fame. But why don't you talk about Bill a little bit?
Well, but maybe the listeners don't know. Bill, of course, is from South Africa. Played tennis down there. Played at a very high level. Took some time off. Went to Wimbledon, and he got to the quarters of a bunch of tournaments. And he said, I beat some good players, and I also lost some good players. So there was no money back then, and as usual, if you're not making anything, it's kind of tough. And so he ended up going into, he was an academic. He has a background in science, and he ended up getting a scholarship to Stanford. And that's where he learned his trade. But in the meantime, he got married to Yvonne, and they have a child, and the child wants to play tennis. So he's out helping him, and he sees all these parents around there. And as a player himself, he started looking at all their games, and he said, it's amazing how many bad, shot selections and things that they're using. And so anyway, a long story short, he started charting by hand his son, and then he would go home and he would put it into a computer. And that's where the idea was brought. He made the connection between the computer and the sport of tennis. And it all started there. Well, in 1982, he came up with sports software, produced a computer that was redesigned by some Apple people and some other people that involved in it. They kind of gutted it and reprogrammed it. And henceforth, the CT120 was born. And then, of course, it's a matter of marketing it. Well, being a Stanford grad, he got in touch with Dick Gould. Dick Gould was involved with the development of it and used it very effectively to win, 19, 20 national championships.
Yeah. If I were to bet with our fact checker, I would say 17. We have a fact checker. He calls me up, gives me our team. Andres Barbosa. Go ahead.
That's right. Whatever it was awesome. And, by the time he really got going, not only was he in 100 colleges, there were a lot of pros that were using it. I was one of them. You were one of them. But the other breakthrough for him was that because everything was expensive, he needed to try and offset that. So he was the first one to have the computer send results to the commentators on TV. And NBC was the first company to do that. And of course, then eventually within years, they used CT120s with Leo Levin and others to do all the majors. So he brought all the stats to TV. Now, on top of that, Arthur Ashe used it in Davis Cup. Billie Jean did it in Fed Cup. And Martina used it. Dennis Ralston used it with Chris Evert to show her how good she was at the net. I did a match for them at Eastbourne, and they wanted to see the results immediately after the match to see how she was doing. She was doing just great. And that was the year that she played Martina in the finals. And damned if she didn't come into the net, and she won the first set. But what did she do after that? She stayed back. So anyway, old habits are hard to get by. But Bill brought the whole idea of analytics into tennis, and he proved how useful it was. But it was just so darn expensive, and it stayed that way until the smartphones came along. But by then, Bill had he'd folded shop and stuff, but he had a collection of data for thousands of matches of juniors, 12s, 14s, 16s, 18s. So he also wrote a monthly newsletter, and in these monthly newsletters, he would explain what's happening. Well, what about the first serve percentage? What actually changes from 12 to 14 to 16? And so he started educating people on top of that. So even though that wasn't his quote full-time job, he did a marvelous job on bringing analytics to the public. But when he stopped doing it, there was nothing else available on the market until all the apps come out. Now we got apps, but nobody knows about the analytics involved and how to use them. So we're almost starting all over again, I feel. And not that Bill Jacobson's work has been, lost completely, but this generation of people don't understand what he spent years trying to get people to understand.
One thing with Bill Jacobson, I know a hobby of his was historical maps of South Africa, or excuse me, of Africa, the whole continent. So now you're not a jock by any means. Like, okay, what are you working on? What's one of your hobbies? But I think for our listeners, so here's a guy who played Wimbledon, is a really good tennis player, and he said, well, my son wasn't really listening to me, but his son was hanging in there to, play bottom of the lineup at Stanford. To us, that's a great tennis player. If someone's even on the team, they may not crack the lineup, but if you're even on the team, you're a very solid tennis player. And
I think his son is a professor at Stanford now.
Is that right? That adds up. But actually, going back to the beginning of this conversation, both Vic Braden and Dennis Vandermeer were big fans of Bill, and he was, be part of a university or a PTR symposium, and Vic had his annual course that you went to out of Costa de Casa and others. What was amazing about Bill is that the people would play a match, and then he would have them first talk to them about what happened. I one time had taken a group of players from Tyler Junior College, and so I was asked to just pick two kids from the program that were two of the career-minded coaches that were accompanying me, and they played a match. And Vic said, "Well, I'm glad we had a fence because I think both of you guys would try to play on the other side of it if there was, if that was within the rules. But you got hit over the net, hit over the fence. You guys are running the wrong way." But yeah, so our listeners, it's amazing when people play a match. They start talking about what happened, and what would be just apparent that they had no idea what happened. They were the ones who played the match. And then a lot of times get in a little bit of trouble is the coaches didn't really know what was going on. One thing that's just on my mind is to mention Tommy Paul, who great athlete. I've been told by many people all the testing they've done at the USTA headquarters, he's always been tops in this and tops in that. And this came out during Indian Wells. One match he came in the net 42 times. He's watching tape. So he said, well, after the first round, I guess it was Rafter. Second round, it was Henman. Third round, Becker. And he's going forward. But to me, in junior tennis, funny story to repeat, we're at the Battle of Boca. A nice service. The tournament's played every week. And one of our students comes up and hits a volley, and his opponent yells out, "This is the Battle of Boca. I didn't know it was allowed for anyone to come to the net and volley." But no, the biggies, Billie Jean King and then Arthur Ashe. So, but Bill, he didn't sell too many of the CT120s, the actual laptop. It was amazing. Even today, you're charting a match on a device. People say, "What are you doing?" It's not very common to chart in tennis, but with the software, I believe he sold 1,100 units. And then I was part of that, where I would go someplace and I would take a group of young coaches that I was training, and we would help parents learn how to chart. But could you talk a little bit about not the CT120, but then how people could go home and they could chart it on paper, then feed it into their PC?
Yeah, because even today now, you go to an ITF tournament, you're not allowed to chart. You're not allowed to have a phone, computer, or anything else on it. They catch you, they kick you out or whatever. He had to come up with a way to cut down on the cost on it, and that's the way he did it. It was just he manufactured these books of, points, and each line had a serve, return, a key shot, and a final shot, and who won the point, and that sort of thing. And you could go home and put it into your computer and get results out. But it took a lot of time, and I think there's, again, he was just born too early. If he'd been born, 20 years later, he would have the market, because he was so brilliant behind what he did and the ways he tried to improve it and also offer options.
Yeah, no, that's true. Ahead of his time. He was the first one to point out that, like your first serve percentage after you're established as a player, it's really tough to change. You can't just change first serve percentages as easily as you think. He was the first one to talk about, using a weapon, with aggressive margins, and, is it better to stay back and just keep it in play, or do you have to hit winners? Well, that was in the change of the dynamics of tennis, where you had to start hitting winners. If you just kept it in play, as Vic said, you just lose slower. Yeah, I think, two young guys became good players. One played at SMU, one played at Texas. Chad Clark and Timmy Hurst, they played a match, and Timmy was a good player, but I think it was the first time that he had maybe even taken a set, but Chad was obviously a level above him. And Timmy won the match, and then afterwards he went over it, and he said, because what happened was, and Chad, I would say, was an aggressive baseliner, but he was missing. Timmy, he wasn't really part of the match. He was, that expression. It was on this player's racket, because they're playing the game. They're going from some shots. They're not just waiting at a high level. You can't just wait for the person to miss. You have to do some forcing. But go back to ITF. You mean the player or the coach can't use any apparatus?
The coach. Nobody around the player, and it's because of betting. Okay. They're worried that someone's going to get there, because the delay is 6 to 7 seconds, and so if you're a clever player and you're hanging around, the odds will change, and you can take advantage of it. So someone decided that betting is a good idea for tennis, and consequently, you work for 10 years to get your player to get into the ITF level, and you're paying a 15, 20,000, whatever, and you're not allowed to chart. And that's exactly when you need to carry on with the chart, because you need to be able to compare. So it makes us, like we've got a paper handout that you can copy so that you can do that. I was not kicked out of a tournament, but I was told to stop charting at a tournament. So I just went out the car and got a blank piece of paper, and and then I just wrote down I kept the points that way, and then I entered it afterwards so I could give this young lady her stats and stuff. So there obviously there are ways out, and they can't stop you from doing that, because that's not going to interfere with betting, because you can't, from all the sheets that you've got, then you can't draw any conclusions. Even as a trained coach, I sit there and I really am not too sure what's happening, because tennis is so subtle. I mean, we're talking about 5 or 6 points really can change a match around. And in what 5 points do you focus on? Is it, one of 20 different things? You can't keep track of it as a human. So charting comes in really handy, but at a young age, you can see very quickly where the kid stands and how their strengths are, because you can compare it to, a database of age group people. And Bill did such a marvelous job of that on showing you where you were as a player. So instead of thinking, well, I got to worry about ranking points or UTRs or whatever, you focus on, if I could just get this a little bit better, or blah, 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 whatever the coach decided. And that's how you build your game, is on improvement. That's a major change in mentality.
With the CT 120 for our listeners, there was 3 ways that you could retrieve the information. One was, we used to just call it the grocery store receipt, which was a small printer right on the CT 120. So I would walk around. I had 2 of them. Craig Tiley spent years with us. He was our off-court guy, and he could chart 2 matches at one time, have 2 CT 120s. You might make a few mistakes, but he became very skilled at it. But I would walk around the CT 120, running many courts and charting a tiebreaker at the same time, and then print out, give them the grocery store receipt. But then also, we used to lug around the printer, and you could go back to your hotel at a tournament and say, okay, I'm going to get 25 pages for each set. But then there was the LCD screen, and I could that would be interesting. I don't think the sophistication is there. I think it's really a brain drain where we don't use the SHIT word on our podcast, but Dave Anderson said he was watching, a couple boxes, and he goes, it's just a show. At the coaches are just yelling things out. Mary Jo Fernandez, who obviously grew up in Miami, I believe she's from the Dominican Republic, so she's fluent in Spanish. It wasn't too long ago, I think it was at the previous U.S. Open, where they put her down courtside. Alcaraz is playing, and we're sitting in our living rooms at home watching the match, and Mary Jo is translating what the people are yelling from the players' box. I understand that even Isevich finally said, no, everybody stop, that he's going to be the only person who's communicating, or everybody starts coaching now that they're allowing it. What's your thought about that, about the coaching now that you can actually coach?
I think it's a great idea for those people who can afford it. And I just feel sorry as one of the hacks out there. I never could have afforded it. So I think that puts me at a distinct disadvantage. But, the pros, hopefully by the time they get to the U.S. Open level, they're financially able to go ahead and and do that. But the qualifiers before that may not be. Anyway,
if you're taking on a team, it can be that a lucky loser gets in, somebody gets a wild card. They're playing an entourage. They're playing a walking corporation. I liked it better. I think what Federer said, if you're taking a math test, you don't get to take a tutor into the math test with you. I know there was, so much cheating going on or whatever, but I liked it best when there was no coaching allowed. And then at the junior level, junior level, you're right. If they allowed that, it'd be like, the really wealthy kids would have, coaches on the bench.
Well, we all had our way of getting information to the player, but it wasn't very sophisticated at that time. I turn my hat sideways, I sit on my hands, it's just like there are codes, but they were pretty basic things. And today, though, they have you see the U.S. Open this year, they had computers, laptops in front of the coaches. Now, they weren't paying a lot of attention to it because they weren't entering data. I'm not sure what was on there, whether it was match data or whether it was history data, probably match data, but not many were paying much attention to it.
I'll come back to that attention but at the grassroots level, I've told so many players, the parent of the other player is illegally coaching. I said, don't worry about it. Actually, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But Federer was asked, Andy Fitzell was there, and he works on the tour, and actually was at Indian Wells. He spent many years with Vic Braden at Indian Wells, so they used to do filming. And Federer was asked, does he look at charts? And he said, no, only during Wimbledon when they put the stats in front of me, and I'm before all the press is ready to ask their questions. So the follow-up question was, what about your assistant coach? Or excuse me, what about your coach? And he said, no, he doesn't chart either. We just go on hunches. But starting in 2017, I was told by a good friend of Tony Gotzik, his agent, that they started using tennis analytics, and And that's where it came out. My father was always right. My father said I was always chicken. I wouldn't hit my backhand. And Federer said he played the best 20 minutes of his life against Nadal in the Australian Open. His own stats, that's like say Lendl, Bill Jacobson was active when Lendl was charting. Lendl's numbers indicated he was so good when he went in. But but he was so stubborn, and he was going to win whether he stayed back or went in. I mean, he never got it done at Wimbledon. But Tony Roach told Lendl, he said, well, one is you're too greedy, you want to keep winning money, and two, you're too egotistical, you want to play number one. You've won everything. He said, why don't you the entire year play the way you need to play at Wimbledon? Instead of skipping the French, is go play the French or go to the net. But that's an example where Lendl, all the great champions are stubborn in one way or the other.
Well, wasn't it the French where McEnroe was up on Lendl and was coming to the net, and he ended up losing the match, but his whole game was, he didn't change the damn thing. He said, I'm good at this. I know this is what I can do. So he came in, and somehow Lendl turned that thing around. So maybe he should have taken a little note from that match.
Maybe there's a chance that Brian Wilson, not Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, but Brian Wilson from the University of Illinois tennis. He was a really good player. He won the NCAAs with Rajiv Ram. So he was training with us. He's sent to us, and so I said, why don't you watch this tape of McEnroe? McEnroe, he played on clay like it was grass, and he was going forward. It's kind of like Edberg versus Chang, and how many times Edberg was at the net.
Yep.
But so I said to Brian Wilson, I said, why don't you watch this match of McEnroe, Lendl? We have it. And he said, well, that's so old. He goes, yeah, I have a film of Henman, which was a good question because Henman had a great run on the red clay. But I still remember
several years. At
that time, I said to Wilson, I said, Brian, I still think McEnroe would be right now. And he's somebody who never stopped playing. I think once you stop playing, it's hard. But McEnroe. I was at the U.S. Open where I had the credentials to go everywhere, and 2 nights in a row, a kid who's had such bad luck, I feel bad for all the bad luck, Christian Harrison, Ryan's younger brother. I tell this story all the time, is that, that was the best tennis to watch. It was McEnroe playing this young 15-year-old, and they were evenly matched. And then McEnroe was going at it just like it was, McEnroe on center court Wimbledon, the brat, playing whoever. Because it was, he was playing Tom Gullickson when he, you incompetent fool. Whatever he yelled out. What's the famous McEnroe line?
Oh, you can't be serious.
Yeah, his book. Yeah, you named his book. You can't be serious. But I do think. Why don't you comment a little bit on, Tommy Paul watching old school tennis? Why do you think that people don't go to the net, and why is it just we say clones taught by clowns are just running? We tell people, we used to even if people we have people play sets. Said okay, hit all forehands. We don't do that now because that's all they do anyway. And we take a Burwash concept and take the backcourt, the red zone, the defensive area, and so you're neutral in your defense and you're way behind the baseline. But the kids are running around backhands even when they warm up. They're running around backhands in the neutral area, the defensive area, and they're making the tennis court a aircraft carrier. Not a postage stamp. They're getting further and further back. They have less and less angle. But why do you comment on? But again, I think it's great, Tommy Paul. It would have been better, he could have adjusted the grips a little bit on a few things, but he's such a great player. But Tommy Paul going forward, he looked a little bit like Sampras the other night, where he took some backhand balls below the level, and then he took the ball right back where it came from. But why do you comment on that?
Right, and
people not coming in?
His motivation has gone. I think has increased fitness and nutrition. I mean, I think for a while he was coasting on his talent. And I think it got across to him, and I don't know who did it or whatever, but it seems that he's beginning to take the game a little more seriously. And if you look at Federer or Chris Evert, go back to Chris Evert and Martin, look at the changes they had to make in their games, their diet, their training. Lendl was one of them as well, over the course of like a year to become who they were after they were already rich and famous.
Martina came over. She came from former Czechoslovakia, and she liked pancakes, and the teenage boys weren't very nice. They were calling her Martuna. She was way overweight. But my son Connor, I think that he's certainly enjoyed partying with Tommy Paul a little bit. But I think Wayne Ferreira with Francis Tiafoe, like put your cell phone down. I think Brad Stein, who had a lot to do with Courier. I don't really know Brad that well, but I met him a little bit on the road when he was with UCA. My son was playing, but yeah, I think that he's done that where it's like, okay, it's showtime, and he's just grown up a bit. I mean, he's been a great player for a long time. When you win the French juniors, just like someone who's close to making the Stanford lineup, that's a really good tennis player. But if you turn the TV on, it's quarterfinals or beyond. It's like, whoa, these gals are really, really good.
Yeah, and they if you've read Nadal's book or Novak's book, and you look at the discipline that they go through on a daily basis, and it's a killer. But they didn't start off that way. They started off as kids and just having fun and all that. But gradually, losing has a way of teaching you what you don't do well. And if you approach it the right way, like they do, they correct it and they work on it so that, remember when Federer started playing Nadal, when Nadal came on the scene, he could use a short cross-court chip to bring Nadal in, and Nadal had trouble handling it. Well, that was the last match you'd ever see that ball giving him trouble, because I'm sure he went back with Uncle Tony and they drilled and drilled and drilled and drilled until that ball was no longer an issue. And that was a sophisticated champion already. Yeah. We're not talking about Nadal as a kid.
Right. Well, you said so well. Bill Tilden, I love that line, tennis players are born out of defeat. Bobby McKinley, he's a little bit older, but he grew up in St. Louis, right by Jimmy Connors, and yep. That's where the skyhook came from. That Jimmy was he lost, and Gloria Connors went right up to Bobby McKinley and said, "You will never beat Jimmy that way again." And so Jimmy was not going to give up the net. A lot of people think it's even like Borg. Well, he was just a baseliner. So that's where. I think with Compu-Tennis and Bill Jacobson, don't tell me what you think, tell me what you know. And you start pushing those buttons, it's like Chris Everett. I mean, she won Wimbledon doubles. I believe she won the U.S. Open doubles as well. And with she could volley, but if you I always tell people, okay, let's pretend you're a tennis audience, and you take the furthest person who's on the left side as your dressing group, and the furthest person to the right. It's okay. Look at Joe. To the left, look at Mary to the right, back to Joe, back to Mary, back to Joe, back to Mary, and now turn to the person next to you and say, "What's the score?" And that's really a lot of times what people do on a tennis court. Their heads are going back and forth like they're about to be hypnotized, and then you say, "Well, Chrissy hit 20 ground strokes, but the point any shot was just one volley," and I think that's a big myth about Borg. And look at Nadal, the champions. They keep adding to their game. Now Nadal. I make the mistake and say, well, yeah, people have the continental grip on the volleys, but he has almost a forehand grip on the backhand volley, but he gets so close to the net, and because of the angle of the racket face, he's going way down. But when he goes in, he's closing in, and he's put himself in a position where McEnroe said, from a technical standpoint, if you just watch his mechanics, you'd say no. But McEnroe said many times, this is going back a few years, but I think Nadal is the best volleyer in tennis.
Yeah, I'd agree from some of the matches I've done. When he comes in, the point's over. There's just no way. And of course, some people go in no matter what, like me. There are other players who set up the point like he does, and then he goes in. So his percentages are pretty darn high because he picks the ball he wants to go in on, and he's just waiting for you to hit what he wants, and he goes. But yeah, the bottom line is you look at him in doubles. My goodness, I'd love to have him as a doubles player. He's all over the place.
With Compu-Tennis, being a developmental coach, working with juniors who have goals, and unlike say a college coach who's taking 18-year-olds, we're dealing with kids that are much younger. We didn't use Compu-Tennis enough for doubles, because one thing we would do is through stats is in skill testing, we would be able to tell the parents, hey, your child is only 11 years old. They really should learn how to hit a serve. They got pizza position pulled down, and the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming right at them. What are your thoughts? I got a text from a mom the other day. Her daughter's got the competitive spirit. I call her Jimmy Connors Jr., and she's out at Indian Wells playing a tournament, and she's playing one up, one back, but so is everybody else. Now, men's college tennis, I think it's a safe bet to say that most D1 teams, only one of the three teams are coming to the net. What are your thoughts on doubles and the way, serve and volley doubles has become almost extinct?
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the balls they tell you they fear, and you and I had those balls when we played. You just learn what to do with them. There are options. And this goes back to early training on overheads and volleys. How many college students have a dependable smash? How many of them can take a low volley and do something and move it around? Same thing with the backhand. And it's almost like, you've got to form those opinions and things around them when they're young, when they're moldable. By the time they get to college, they've been through so much of a rat race, and I mean, face it, half of them know they're going to play a few semi-pro tournaments, and then they're going to get a real job. So the top ones that actually end up going. So their heart isn't in it like it was when they were 16. But if you take a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old and always get them to the net, let them hit some fun little volleys and smash it, and just get them used to it, and then you keep it up. But when you take a 15-year-old who spent their life on the baseline and bring him to the net, and someone's pounding the ball at 90 miles an hour at him, they'll say, okay, listen, I'm out of here. A case in point was that I worked with a young lady in England who was number one in the 12s and the 14s. She was a rabbit. I mean, she got everything, and she pushed it back and all that, so she could get anything. Well, in the 16s, all her mates, all her competitors who had been hitting forehands that hit the back fence were learning to get them in, and she came to me for lessons to learn how to, hit more aggressively. And in practice, within a month, she could hit some really terrific shots. But you put her under pressure, and what did she do? You see, and she ended up quitting tennis in the next 6 months.
Wow. She
got so frustrated that she could not change.
I like when you mentioned fear. Somebody you probably know from all your years, the late Jim Martz, who recently passed away with Florida Tennis. He would call me periodically. I've got quite a library, and he was going to write a book on Arthur Ashe quotes. And I think there should be. I think that's a great idea. I think there should be a quote on a book from Roger Federer. Can you, would you listen to Roger? Because Roger had a line is that people fear the low volley. There's just so many things that, if you go to the net, good things happen. He said one time, it's frightening how bad the level play is at Wimbledon. I know that less than 2% of the time, my opponents are going to come in behind their serve. One thing we do with, Bill Jacobson, we, taken we just call it a T-chart, a plus minus, and it's very easy to even have like an 11-year-old chart a match. But someone I spent a lot of time with, it was Richard Hernandez, and he used to have his students do this all the time. You keep your own score, and your opponent has nothing to do with the score. You just keep your own score. It's okay, play just play 10 points, and you serve 5, and on the 5th point you can spin to where you're going to serve. And if you go to the net, you get a +3 if you win. The point's over, you're at the net, you get a -1. But if you're at the baseline, you win the point, you get a +1. If you're at the baseline and you miss, it's a -3. And then even with that, it's like, you figure out the math. And that's something that's changed in basketball. People finally figured out, okay, this percentage of shots from the 3-point range. I've heard people say, well, that's why people are staying back in tennis. And I said, no, it's still 1 point. You're not getting 3 points for hitting a winning forehand from 15 feet behind the baseline. It's still 1 point. So it's like, no, that's not a good argument. That's not so good.
No, and you got to run. It's funny. Roscoe Tanner called the other day and to ask what my opinion was on why players are standing so far back and stuff, because that was not the way we played back then. And and it's the result that why not? Nobody's coming to the net. You don't need to hit any passing shots or anything. All you got to do is keep it in play. And if you're willing to run all that extra mile, you're okay. But you can't do anything from there. You can just defend. And then, so now you get Carlos coming up and standing on the net. How un-Spanish of him, just taking the baseline and taking balls on the rise and stuff. And of course, he's gonna single-handedly change tennis, I think, because of what's happened.
No, he's so good for the game. I think in so many ways. We put up something on Facebook on a daily basis. We've been doing it for 15 years. And we put up Roscoe Taylor's serve the other day, where he's just talking about how to serve, the father telling him to reach for the highest leaf on the tree. But also, too, Jack Kramer was interviewing him, asked him just to find, why you play offensive tennis. And, but yeah, the brain, all the research done on the brain, the young players coming up, if they play one up, one back doubles, throughout their 4 years of high school tennis, they're not going to all of a sudden be serving volleyers.
No, they're not.
The future's now, and to play, begin with the end in mind and play like you are going to be expected to play in the end. But there's too much emphasis on winning. The first time you could be ranked in the U.S. the first time they had rankings was for 13-year-olds. It wasn't,
Oh yeah.
Now the whole thing with the UTR and, of course, the rackets and the two-handed backhand. Joel Trucker mentioned the two-handed backhand. Before it was okay, people were struggling a little bit and hitting a lot of underspin on the backhand side, but still, it's just, and I like to tell players, or ask them, ID your game. What type of player are you? I'm all court. You're all court. You only come to the net to pick up balls and shake hands. I mean, what do you mean you're all court?
Yeah. Well, now that's one thing that you can do with analytics is to get your players to play a style just for the heck of it. When they're kids, you can goof around this way. Okay, I want you to stay back, and both of you are going to stay back and play. Okay, now the next set, one of you comes in on every first serve, and then you see how it changes the stats, and it's amazing how it can alter the game stats a little bit here and there, but it doesn't really change the fact that you've got a great backhand and your forehand stinks. That won't change anything. But it teaches them some adaptability, and you can show them the stats and the results of how they play when you do this stuff. So I see a lack of that in changing game styles in practice sessions, so they understand, one, how to do it, but two, what to do against it. And you can do that with analytics.
Another Roger Federer quote: "I didn't know you're supposed to win in practice." I equate it to a musician. Well, you can only play one song. Don't you want to learn a new song? Your song is just run around your backhand from the baseline. With I had some juniors playing just the other day. A young girl. I mean, if she's not one, she's very close to being ranked one in her country. I mean, she's a Canadian and got the maple leaf and the warm up, and the federation's putting her on an airplane, and she's playing one up, one back doubles, and just this, that, and the other thing. Lefty, good size. Really overall technique is very close to being really efficient. Just had her play a set and say, no, you can't come in unless it's just so close, a miss hit. There's no drop shots. Your opponent's doing the same thing. Just you both have to hit underspin on the backhand. You can only arc the forehand. Just stay back, and and they're like the level of play goes way down because they don't. That's not part of their game. They have no patterns. They have no variety. They're just playing the same way over and over again. That's Jacobson again. About 50 points in a set. In the 5 patterns now with most kids, it's like, okay, say the 12 and unders. Okay, no one's hitting aces. So the one pattern is a double fault. And then they miss a forehand return, a backhand return, a forehand ground stroke, a backhand ground stroke, and then somebody misses going for a forehand, the $100 shot from the 10-cent position. And I think parental involvement, like when junior tennis now with the telephone, kids will take a water break and they'll text their mom and go, I'm in the wrong group. And I go, I don't know why you need to text your mom. She's right there on the other side of the fence. Because the parents, years ago, the parents weren't at practice. It's kind of like I spent a lot of time in Ireland, and when they try to close a pub in Ireland, the bartender finally says, "Do you have homes to go to?" Well, so it's for me with junior parents, it's like, do you have a job to go to? They're just there watching the whole time, and but yeah, no variety. And, just, I love situational drills. And this one player,
Yes.
she would be best to take 6 months off, the Jack Kramer mentality. Why don't you take 6 months off and still play competitive points, but, serve and volley, play an entire set. Braden would say, play an entire set where you got to poach on every ball. And, and even tell the players, okay, you can't go down the line. You got to return cross court, but every point you play a poach. Go play a set.
Right.
With, then you're going to get used to, being able to take a volley and go right at the, if it's a right hander, go right at their hip, and then what can that person do with a shot? But to create that, I've had kids visit where they have, it's like Bud Collins said, it's not a Hawaiian grip, it's not a Western grip. It's so far over, it's an Hawaiian grip, and you just tell kids, okay, I want you to play a set, but the only thing you hit, only time you hit topspin is on your serve. And they absolutely cannot adapt. They look at you like, because the way they're hanging onto the racket, there's no way. I mean, their grip's so far under, they have no options.
Well, look at the good players that are going up to the net with like a semi-Western forehand trying to hit a volley. And you wonder why they all hit topspin volleys from everything. Well, they never learned to change grips, or they have no confidence in it. And it's a shame, because I think that's the sort of thing, do you know Craig Webster?
Yeah. Well, from years ago. I mean, years ago, I was playing tennis when he would bring groups over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's teaching 6-year-olds how to use the continental grip and hit spin serves and hit underspin volleys. They're not great, but he's introducing it to them right away. And he said, this is the best time because they don't know any better. And if they make a mistake, who cares? Because they're making mistakes on everything.
Yeah. With back in the 70s, he was bringing groups over from South Africa. So I say I know him. Certainly on the internet a couple of times. I'm not really one to spend a lot of time. We do put free content up, but Craig Webster with grips.
Yeah, he was a marvelous player, and he did everything. And I met him at Dennis's.
Yep. I'm having a senior moment. Who's the famous guy who's got the podcast? Rogan. What's his first name?
Joe
Rogan.
Oh, Joe Rogan.
So
yeah.
Andy Fitzhell, or it's not Andy Fitzhell, someone with a little better serve. Andy Roddick has a podcast now, and now it's on TV. And I've listened to each episode, and do some walking, and I go, okay, I'm going to listen to this, and it's really entertaining. It's insightful in many ways. But he goes, they asked him about grips, and he goes, I'm from Nebraska. I don't do grips. And Gilbert, who was on another episode, he goes, he said the same thing. I don't do grips. And granted, if you're taking somebody who, like Coco Gauff, she's 6th in the world, and you start to coach her, I can understand where, okay, we're not going to dismantle. That's a pretty tough assignment. You start coaching her 25 days before the U.S. Open, and you go, okay, I'm going to change your game. I think with Federer, there was so much buzz when Lendl was going to start to coach Zverev, and everybody's going, "Whoa, how's that going to go?" And Federer, again, he should have some quotes. He should have a book. He goes, "Well, I really have only met Ivan. I don't really know him. I'm sure you'll be able to help him out, but he's already 3 in the world." It's but at that level, I think it's more the coaching is more of take the role of a confidant and mentor.
Yes. Yeah. It's somebody. It's another pillar to have to lean on, so you feel you deserve it.
Yeah. Bill Jacobson, he certainly, I was teaching tennis in Germany, for example, and the only reason I was invited, I wasn't there as a coach, is I knew Roger and Robbie Seguso really well. From the time they were like little kids. Robbie was 10, I think, and Robbie was playing Davis Cup. And but Bill, he was at those events, and I think really where he made an impact was, and I know that 1 large tournament, 2 smaller tournaments, our crew, and now all these years later, Craig Tiley, who was with us for 7 years, Tennis Australia, I think they're a front runner with technology, but
yes.
That, Bill was at those events, so, but the thing was that, when we would help out, we would relay messages to the commentators, so they had some stats in front of them. It's much more sophisticated now, but prior to Bill Jacobson, Yeah, the commentators, they didn't have numbers.
No, and they were surviving on hunches, just like Roger did for a while, and then but you can't argue with numbers. And it's just like Bill said. The idea of this quote, this important point, whichever point you think it happens to be. He said, if your forehand stinks, it stinks no matter what point it is. And if it's good no matter what point it is. So he said, you got to play the law of averages and work with your averages. And if so many players, particularly the juniors, when they're learning something, they're so hungry to get the win, they give up on the very thing that is going to build them as a player. They quit and they go back to their old style so they can win. And like, you've lost the whole point. Don't sacrifice your game. You're 14 years old. You've got a long way to go, Buster, before you're any good at all. And this is part of the learning process. You got to do it. You got to play what we're practicing, and sink or swim. Eventually, it'll fit into your game.
Yeah, I think one's lens. Carl Hale, who is the tournament director, good friends with Richard Hernandez. I spent a lot of time with him. He's always saying, well, that person's circle's not very big. One thing people don't realize about Vic Braden is that he helped run the tour. And, he spent so much time with Kramer. He's very close to Kramer. Then he ran the Kramer.
Mm-hmm.
He was, teaching all those juniors at the Kramer Tennis Club. But, just to sit around and talk to, and again, I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of the top U.S. tennis players, they spend a lot of time talking about fantasy football. That didn't exist before. that didn't exist before. Years ago, It was more the players were talking about, the matchups, how so-and-so plays against so-and-so. And, Welby Van Horn used to ask people, how do you develop a tennis mind? In baseball and basketball, you could comment on that. Don't you think that other sports in the U.S., that's been really very much a fabric of the sport, is charting?
Yeah. I mean, they've had apps for, obviously track and field. Stop watching the measuring stick and you're in business. You go into basketball, you can either hand draw it or you've got apps that'll do the basketball, no problem. Baseball gets a little bit more, a little tougher based on the app that you're using, because some are fairly sophisticated and some are basic. But I mean, there's an app for almost any sport at any level, and parents are using them because they understand, hey, this is how I get my kid better. And kids don't argue with stats. They'll argue with mom and dad or coach, but they will, and they'll say, oh, that's not true. My first serve, I got it in all the time. Oh, well, look at these numbers. Oh, okay. Yeah,
I think it's like the guy who goes fishing, and pretty soon, the 6-inch fish was 16 inches. I mean, I know sometimes a parent will be walking around, well, my child, every time they start talking about how many times they double faulted, they beat up the kid by increasing the number. And I go, and they show, my kid double faulted 19 times. I go, oh, you charted the match? Oh, no, I didn't chart it. And then you just know, were you there were you just holding your fingers up? That's one. That's two. I think another issue too, a lot of times kids will tell their parents they don't want their parents to come and watch.
Yeah.
But junior tennis players, for the most part, they're not prepared to play college tennis. That UCLA stadium, it doesn't really have, it's so huge. It doesn't have the college tennis atmosphere it should. But there's still, because one of our students, he won a match. He's been a guest on our podcast, and his father as well. Spencer Johnson won the last match out to for his team to beat Harvard. And Harvard's Andrew Rube's team, I think they're 9 or 10 in the country. But I'm always asking college kids to tell junior kids, tell them about a 3-all match. And that's where if it's practice and you have you're freaking out when you have to hit one overhead in practice and you're only 12. What do you prefer? I want to play D1 tennis. I want to play D1 tennis. I want to play D1 tennis. Like, oh my word.
No, they introduced the crowd getting involved during the point recently in college tennis to try and, who wants to sit there with his hands folded and quiet for the whole match? So they've let some of the conferences are letting the spectators, I'm not get filthy, but I mean, it's just, double fault, and all this sort of thing, which is reminiscent to what all college players at 3 all go through. It's hell. Everybody is watching every move you make. Oh my God.
No, my son Connor, I've been to some Davis Cup matches, and my son Connor was playing for Ohio State against Georgia. Manny Diaz, the coach, called me up and apologized that all the umpires were my age, and they were all intimidated by the Georgia crowd. It was worse than Davis Cup. And he was on the court where the players, I think it was all these fraternity guys came out, frat rats, and I think they'd all been liquored up, and it was just crazy. Jim Lair, I mean, he used to do that at his camps. Get kids, you're playing, and one kid is playing the other kid, and they can just say, you can't swear and you can't say anything about their mother. Everything else goes, and they're yelling and screaming, and they're taking a tennis racket and they're banging the top of aluminum tennis garbage can and trying to prepare them for that. And how's it go that kids today are they're rightfully overprotected, and as a result, underprepared? Because now kids, they just, parents can't say, hey, just ride your bike and go hang out at the park and go hit the backboard. So there are some things, you have to, think about parents are in today. So there are some changes, yeah.
Yeah, we used to, when we wanted to put people under pressure, we've done that. But we've also had all the other people in the camp line up on both sides and throw tennis balls back and forth to each other during the point.
Oh, wow. That's a great
fun. Well, it's the whole point, and I think Jim Lair pointed it out. He says, you got to point out how absurd some of these players are making a big deal out of little things, and they get all twisted. So he said, so you should get them used to the most absurd things you can think of, like what you did. And then all of a sudden match play doesn't ever quite get to that crescendo until you get to college.
No, it's the same thing. I think they study in other sports, like Bill Belichick, Tom Brady is in practice and he has the assistant coaches running in and they're throwing some of the equipment, they use for blocking and, just make practice so difficult. But yeah, it's just, Jim Lair would have people switch rackets and, say, okay, yep, you can cheat 3 times, just to see how they would react to cheating. And with that was one thing with Bill Jacobson, the user stats. I don't want to mention any names. Mario Cosentino, he's somebody I thought, and every time he used to say, "Oh my God," I used to go, "You're such a good Catholic." You're praying in the middle of the match, like point after point. Oh my God, and just chart it and go. Yeah, in that match, you said, "Oh my God," 62 times. Like every time you lost a point, "Oh my God," and it's like, is it a scary movie? I mean, you're on the Titanic? What's going on here?
Well, it's funny you brought that up because one of our upgrades is voice to text notes, and anytime you can press a small tab there and it'll automatically record what you say, and then you tap it when you're finished and it changes it to text, and it comes out on our report, and it also records what the score was in the game and all that at the same time, so you can recall a lot of things, and you could very easily put in swearing or throwing rackets or whatever you want, because you can, with voice to text, you can put in anything you want.
Let's do that. Let's talk racket stats. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Your mission, where you are with it, where you're going with it.
Racket stats is just one of the dozen apps that are out there, and they all have a different kind of focus. From very simple stats like Ion Court is free, and it broadcasts, so you can send it to all your friends. A lot of the colleges like that. There's Pro Tracker, which is a little expensive to pick up. I mean, not regarding lessons and stuff today, but it's pretty darn sophisticated. It records a lot of things, and it kind of depends on what you want. I built because of my background in teaching, maybe not such good players for a while. I built this so that mom with 2 kids running around and her son or daughter is playing a match. I built this for her so that she could record when she could make mistakes and undo them, and basically gather, 50 to 75% of the information the kids play, because at a young level, the stats really don't change over the long course of the match. And so I designed it to be simple enough for people like that to use. And we have 2 levels. We have a beginner, which is free, because I always felt that there's so many families around the world that have no idea about what tennis is all about. And so we built this, and it doesn't have but 8 stats, but it gives them a kind of a basics on first serve and that sort of thing, so that at least they understand some of the basics of it. And then we have an advanced level, which has 44 stats that encompass everything. We don't do zones, because the people who are using the pro level, the advanced level, most of them are parents, and asking them to pick a zone and also choose whether it's a forced error or a regular error, that's too tough. It's too sophisticated. So we'll do that at our next level, which we call the pro level. But so I've kept it fairly simple, but it's amazing. I'm working with Joey Blake, and he's traveling. He was up in Montreal with his with one of his students, and he would, he knows it because he grew up on Compu-Tennis. But he would send them to me because I'm constantly rejuvenating the database for the pros, and we're trying to separate it into levels. Bob Clark over in Europe is doing the same thing, and we're trying to get a database for, like, what's the difference between a 100 player and a 300 player? Well, it's not that much, but it's definitely there. So anyway, he sends them to me, and then we go through it together, and 99% of the time, we don't disagree on anything. He's used to this stuff, but he's given it to me for my database, and it's kind of interesting to see what he's working on with her. And you would talk to him, and you would agree with him, or he would agree with you. We're all from the same mindset because we know analytics. For people who don't know analytics, it's a wild goose chase. Oh, well, I didn't like her footwork. Oh. Okay, give me some numbers. Where did her footwork make the error? That sort of thing. And then we leave all the analytics to racket stats, but we leave all the coaching to the coaches and the parents. So, like, if your forehand is breaking down, hey, racket stats can't tell you why. That's somebody else's job. Somebody who knows you very well as a player. And it's up to that. So we're trying to, but then we've got a lot of requests coming in for simplifying the stats and maybe pointing out areas that the student may work on. So not in this edition, but in our next update, I'm developing an algorithm that will, basically what it does is I look at all the points that have been played, and where are the stats that have been involved in those? Obviously, serve and return to serve, big ones. But is it serve to the deuce court, forehand or backhand, or is it serve to the ad court, forehand or backhand, where they're not doing as well? And usually, Bill called that the serve variance, deuce ad court variance, and there's so much meat in just knowing that. And of course, then you throw in return to serve, and then all of a sudden you start seeing the patterns. Hey, this person is only serving wide all the time. And, blah, 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 blah. So as a coach, you can see what's happening because Racket Stats is live. You can do it during the game and see why they're doing it. And then afterwards, you can make corrections. Or if you're in college or high school, maybe you can help them out right then. But, you and I know that the amount of information a player can absorb during a match is very small. What was it? Jimmy Connors was playing an exhibition against Laver at Caesar's Palace, and he was losing, and he came over to his side, and Pancho Segura gave him this tip, whatever it was, and Connors comes alive and goes out and beats him. And they asked him afterwards, what did you tell him? He said, play your game.
Yeah.
And that's, in a sense, that's what analytics is all about. You say, well, why are you doing this? Play the game that you know you can play.
Well, a great Jimmy Connors quote is, play the way you're taught. And, certainly we, just getting back to like the Jacobson, the aggressive air margin, just do you know what the aggressive air margin is? If you go to the net, you win 2 out of 3, 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12, 16 out of 24. And, it's amazing. But people, I would say at every level of tennis, they don't know that stat. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, because nobody presents it. It isn't around anymore. It died with the CT 120.
That's amazing.
We're hoping to bring it back again, but, the average, our market, our demographics are the parents of developing players, not the pros. You've got tennis analytics for that. You've got spin insight for that. You've got all these sophisticated things that you can go to if you're an advanced player, but that's not our market. Although you can use it at that level, it doesn't produce all the results, but it produces enough to really work with your player on.
Warren Pretorius, I've known a long time. He's been a guest on our podcast with Tennis Analytics. Through him, I spent some time talking to Craig O'Shaughnessy. I think he with the brain game, as he's been on TV, so hats off to him to get to that level where he has had the exposure of telling people about the success rate at the net. But I just think with Jacobson, it's great that you're carrying the torch. That language should have never gone away.
No.
I think the romancing of a player, like even in college, I've coached so many players, and my students have coached so many players who played Division I college tennis. And I understand that kids are so busy as a student athlete, the academic side. But like say going way back to a Jim Verdick, his number 7 and 8 player, they weren't out there clapping their hands and cheering. They were charting. They were charting, and that's where, like you say, Dennis Vandermeer had so much respect for Jim Verdick, that Jim Verdick would have someone who was a freshman and they're charting and they're not even in the lineup. They're helping with this and that. They weren't taking the role just of a cheerleader and screaming at the top of their lungs. But that's where a Jim Verdick, a kid who didn't play as a freshman, would be an All-American and national champion by the time they're a senior.
Well, then the tennis IQ of a charter goes through the roof, because all of a sudden they start understanding the game because they're charting it. So it's really forcing them to pay attention to what's going on the court. And by the way, you can chart and cheer, by the way. It's not impossible.
Yeah. No, we do with young kids. We just, get one of those pins that you click, it's red and blue. And, you can just, now people are not supposed to take an English paper and mark in red, just like at a soccer game. Okay, let's not keep score and let's give out the participation trophies. But just like the peanuts in a candy bar, the cluster of peanuts. So say someone is missing a, BHGCC, they're missing a backhand cross court over and over again. They got an open racket face, they pull horizontally. So you can just write down, the symbol for what shot they miss. And then it's not TV, but to create your own graphics is just draw a line from where you put the mark, where they missed the backhand cross court, and just take a pencil and draw where it landed. And then, that's coming back to Jacobson, is that they're really making the same mistake over and over again. The drama of the match is there. That's where, using a CT 120 for 17 years, you really know the stats. If you really study Jacobson, you know the stats without having even to chart. It's like, I've watched enough. I mean, the parents need to stay there to support their child and such. But I think a lot of times, especially in junior grassroots tennis, if you watch the first 20 points, you've seen the whole match.
Yeah. There's nothing new at all.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think I can't understand from my standpoint, and you probably can't from yours, is why aren't more coaches latching on to charting? Why aren't they telling, like high school, you got extra players out the wazoo. Why don't you give those kids a pad of paper and say, this is what I want you to do, draw lines or put symbols or whatever system you like, but do something. Learn this game. Help us out. But nobody, including college coaches, they're just like, no, I want my guys cheering. I don't want them charting. And I said, well, you can cheer and chart at the same time. It's like, give me a break. But I mean, it's just like it's an automatic refusal. They all say, oh, that's a great idea. And then they never use it. And it just,
yeah, I love that. I love that you said tennis IQ. I think that's one way for our listeners, the coaches, to say to your parents, well, we're trying to improve their tennis IQ. Verdict used to call it, put your brains down. Get a clipboard. You can chart many different ways, as you so well know. That I think at Raven Clausen spent a lot of time with us, and I can remember playing a match because it was right in Tampa where we were based, and we got 4 people charting it 4 different ways. Just to get feedback.
Well, when Billie Jean was number 1 as an amateur, she went down to study with Harry Hopman. And his first rule that he told her was that if you're not sleeping, then you're watching and you're taking notes or you're practicing. He said you're doing one of those things. You're going to become a master of understanding what all these players can do, and that stuck with her. She was very big into it. As a matter of fact, she invested, I believe, in Bill's system, not the system, but invested in the company at one point. So, but it's just baffling that players don't understand what analytics can do. And I tell these pros, I said, you use this and it gives you a report card to give to the parents so they can see whether their kids are improving or not. It educates the parents. So, and then eventually you can get them to do the charting and give you the feedback so that you can make better use of everybody's time. Maybe it's not the first, the common complaint is, well, we're just doing serves today. We're just doing forehands. Forget the group. Why, if you got them all on different courts, why can't you pair people who are working on similar things? Maybe I'm working on my serve, but you're working on a return of serve. You can do that. And with analytics and somebody charting it, you can see the results instantly.
In Sweden, I'm mispronouncing the name, but Växjö, I think it's 88. There's a sign up, 88 ATP titles, and Wielander won a bunch of them. But the parents, they can go to the matches, but they got to go on their own. They go as a squad. And someone sent me a clip the other day. I'd seen it before, but to see it again is always good. Lubitschek, who was 4 in the world, and his story as a war refugee, but best known perhaps. I understand he's working with the French now. But I believe that's true. But he's Coach Federer, and with just charting. His point on this clip was kids don't even watch tennis on TV. We know that we have a house with 8 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms. Our coaches that we've trained send his kids really for a character check. I mean, we have some kids that are here that are really well taught technically, but their coaches want them here just because of the character muscle. But we just know, after 9/11, I just don't even like to mention that because so many people lost their life. I used to have groups come and stay in a hotel, but then I said, well, okay, to make this work, people can come on an individual basis. And kids, I mean, I had a kid one time, it was start of a 5th set tiebreaker at the U.S. Open, and the kid says, hey, it'd be okay if I go shower? And I'm going, yeah, you go shower if you want. I mean, it's like I'm thinking I'm going to go bang my head against the wall. I'm trying to teach this kid to be a tennis player. But, you have to watch. And, I think with myelin, you're correct, it's been proven that you can grow myelin just by watching,
Yeah, that's where it forms at first in your visual cortex. That's why we're visual learners.
Yes.
With Ilja, let's ask a couple questions on like how people can get hooked up and with Racket Stats. You have some questions for him?
Yes, I mean, I went over on the website. I looked through the app. I mean, it's amazing stuff. I didn't know that you can put a speech to text and you can put it under each point. I think it's amazing. Again, as we mentioned, it's like a T chart, and then you can do a line chart. So it's like you're combining a T chart with a line chart. So with a line chart, it's like you're really telling a story, and you can add really what you can chart in there. And it's a great thing that you mentioned. The demographic is parents, and we spoke a little bit before that. I think for the parents sometimes, when you're mentioning stats or analytics, I think people at first are like, "Well, this is too much. You need somebody like really to hold their hands. It's not that complicated."
Correct.
So, I think it's great that it's like a first version is free just to get people into it. So my question would be, what the approaches that you take to actually to kind of soften it for the parents? I know you said it's demographic for parents. Like, how do you go to somebody to introduce the analytics when they're kind of like skeptical? I know that we're approaching it sometimes just like, hey, either you bring a book to the tennis match, so take your emotions away and just read a book, or
Go for a walk.
Go for a walk, or
Don't climb the fence.
yeah. And that kind of makes sense, but you still have to kind of spend some physical time to explaining to them things. But I mean,
Well, we've done in this. We've been using flags, green and red flags. Green above average, red for below average, and if there's no flag, you're within the average. And of course you pick your database, your comparison database, when you go to print out the report. Do I want to be, we go all the way from 14 all the way up to men's pros, women's pros. So we have a database there, and you compare your stats, and then the flags pop up. But what we have in the past was that the printout, when you go to check your stats live during the match, all the stats show up. And it's just like, oh my God, there's too many. So what we've done is, in this next version, each area is going to be condensed, and it's going to have a green flag or a red flag or a neutral flag or no flag. Then that'll draw your attention to the categories. And if it's a neutral or green, maybe you don't pay attention. So you go right to the category where it's red, and then you can expand it if you want. All the reports, unfortunately, it's too difficult at this point to print out a report where they're condensed. So all the reports are going to be the full-fledged thing. But at least when you're doing the match for the parents, when they go down and hit the bottom left where it says stats, all it's going to do is pop up the categories with the flags, the appropriate flags. And so it's just a matter of now getting them to realize that, well, your coaching style really dictates how you use the stats. Some coaches prefer to work on strengths and make them stronger. Some prefer to do a blend of strengths and weakness. They're all different. And so now it's up to the coach to take those stats and to interpret them the way they want to work with the child. But the bottom line is that I've never had a student tell me the stats were wrong. Never. In 40 some odd years. They believe them, and they should. But I mean, they believe them instantly because it's a number, and that's the benefit. Oh, I didn't know. I played this match. How did I do on this? And they'll come off with questions because once they understand all the varieties of stats and stuff, they know which ones are really key to them. Maybe it's the forehand approach shot. Maybe it's the backhand approach shot. Maybe it's their second serve on the deuce court. Maybe it's, you don't know, but they know it. And so they'll come off the court and they'll say, okay, how did I do? Or if they've lost, it may take half an hour of cooling off, and then they'll say, okay, what happened to this and that? And they become very knowledgeable about their game, which is key.
Mm-hmm.
One thing with the opinion, obviously, Vic Braden, like to rule out opinion, rule out guesswork. Would you comment on the consistency of the charter determining whether it's a forced error or unforced error?
Well, we don't offer that yet, but that's a big one. And it takes some getting used to. An experienced somebody like you would have no trouble with it. But we're talking about parents, and they so we don't offer that. We will, and I'm assuming that parents may try it once or twice and say, forget it, because we're going to build into it zones and the ability to put down the shot previous to the last shot. So instead of recording a missed passing shot, we may record it as a forced error based on an aggressive approach shot from something or other or whatever. And I think a lot of parents they'll quickly decide that's not for them.
I would add this, with a lot of years teaching tennis, that I think today, I'm asked this often, I'm sure you are as well, is that children today, for whatever reasons, they don't listen to their parents as much as they did years ago. So that's, I think, coming back to the numbers. The numbers tell a story, and again, it's black and white. I think also the graphics is very good. That it's not just a matter of giving them numbers. I like the idea if you could take a match, and if they missed, 18 forehands in the first set, whether it's a forehand return, a forehand approach, forehand groundy, that they actually could get a visual of that. But that also takes a lot of work.
Yeah, we're not quite that sophisticated. I've self-funded this now for the 5 years, and these changes aren't inexpensive. So, before I can go on to my next one, of course, I'll probably be looking for some investors on it. But I wanted to get it. I think investors look for a solid business with no problems with it, whether it's an app, whether it's a business. And they want to spend their money in marketing. They don't want to spend their money fixing up something that's not working well. So I think with this newest update, we're going to have the meat and potatoes solidly on our side. And we have something no one else has. And that is we have an active database. So I can give you all the stats on 14s, 16s, 8. Remember, I had somebody, and I can't name him because you may know him, over in Europe, and they wanted to know if they could get all the benchmarks for all the age groups. And I wrote back and said, that's taking an awful lot of time and money to put all that together, and no, you can't. So, so that's, now I'm sure Warren and the people up at that level, they have all that, but not down at the bottom level. They don't have comparisons so that you don't know how you're doing. And, how do you know your kid's ready to move up? Well, some parents say, well, I want to move up as soon as possible and get used to it, so they get shellacked. And other parents are a little more cautious, with these, you can do a sort of a comparison between your 14-year-old and the 16-year-old, and they can see what the stats, what are you going to have to improve? Well, you got to hit more winners basically off your forehand, or you got to get the net, or, your aggressive game has to pick up.
I can talk to you.
Or else you're going to be a nobody.
I could talk to you forever. Playing up, Jimmy Connors, arguably the best age group ever in American tennis, 1952. So many great players. Of course, tennis hadn't exploded at that point in Eastern Europe with the wall coming down, the Berlin Wall in '89. But Connors was asked about playing up. He goes, no, you don't play up. Just play differently, Go to the net more, add this to your game, add that to your game, play where the pressure is. I can remember one parent, their child played up. They played in the 16s, and they lost early. And the mom said, I should have played him in the 18s. I go, what are you talking about? Actually, going back to Braden with Bill Jacobson, with the word data is, how Vic summed that up, is you need to get the objective data on how to structure practice. I don't think you can say it any better than that.
Well, when people start talking about charting, you're right. They see what's on TV, they think how complicated it is, and it really isn't all that complicated. And it's just going to take, just like with a videotape. How many years did it take for pros to generally accept videotape? And now, of course, you can do it with your phone, but still, how many pros actually use it? What, 10%? So it's still not an accepted tool.
That's amazing. That's amazing that people don't film. We document development. Unless someone's a complete beginner, we have to film on the first day. We skill test. We have 25 shots, and then we do a tiebreaker test. You can do it to a set. You get one serve. You get your serve in, and then you feed balls, and they have to hit the 4 quadrants across court deep, backhand deep. But if they miss, and they're down love 15, and of course the feeder rarely makes an unforced error.
Right.
And I'm saying, get a basketball, find an empty court, get a partner, and just go out and do that. Hit, another Bradenism is hit targets. Can you hit targets? But I think that combination back in the day with Vic and Bill Jacobson, it's like how could you not look at the stats? I mean, it's like come on, you think that the players would really want to be looking at the stats. Not to be paralysis by analysis, not to overanalyze, but where am I getting better? I know with Warren Vittori's at that level, Djokovic, I've been told he spends more money than anyone. He wants to find out where his opponent's serving, where do they serve crunch time, where do they serve on key points. How has it been as far as why don't you tell us a little bit about the progression, with dealing with parents getting parents involved, or even the team concept of having one junior chart for another junior.
Yeah, and it's not well accepted yet. That's one of our biggest battles is getting pros who are in charge of these junior programs to understand that they can use other kids to chart because they've never done it before. It wasn't done for them. This is a whole generation of coaches who've never experienced analytics. It wasn't around. It's analytics from Bill's standpoint stopped in 94. So tell me, where do you get your analytics? Well, I can't pay Warren, his $90 for every practice match that I do, and even then there's a bit of a delay. So what do I do? So then I put it up on do Swing Vision. There's still a little bit of delay. I get to see the match, but how many people actually will sit down and go through the match and analyze what the stats are showing them? And then they don't understand, well, what's a good stat? What's a bad stat? Where should he be? These are just numbers. So there's a huge educational issue out there for the industry, for parents, for players, and we're starting from scratch. And that's where we are right now, from scratch.
With the tennis culture, comparing it to football, we say it all the time on this podcast, as a high school teams, it's law. They have to send the film of their previous game to their next opponent and vice versa. So yeah, we say nuts and bolts, that's, grip, swing, body, but then the X's and O's to do the matchups. I really think too that when people talk about the matches and O's on television commentators, they're doing it, like you said, more on gut feel. They're not going, well, this is a percentage of times that they serve a volley. This is when they do serve volley, their effectiveness. I have a question about drop shot versus approach shot. I remember one time on TV, and I like to listen to Gilbert. And he was now in the TV booth, and he had been coaching Murray, and he's commented on the pluses for Murray's drop shots. And then Murray said, "Well, I thought you didn't like drop shots." And he said, no, you have to realize that you're hitting the drop shot from behind the baseline when your opponent was inside the baseline. He goes, if you're inside the court and your opponent's 10 feet back, and another Jacobson, a green light point, Carlos Goffey, they collaborated on that. You're ahead by 2 or 3 more points. But we still tell people, hey, come on, you got to hit more approach shots and drop shots. What would your comment on that be?
Yeah. Well, on approach shots, what's the biggest mistake is trying to hit them deep and hard all the time. What happened to angles? What happened to chip shots? Where is the slice approach shot gone? Slice approach shot, like Dennis pointed out, slice approach shot is basically your next volley. It's the same motion and same grip and everything else. So you hit but you can control the court so much better with slices than you can with topspin. Every topspin anybody hits goes to the baseline, and it's 4 feet high. So the opponent takes 3 steps one way, 3 steps the other way, and then they pass you.
When they bang the ball at topspin, they can't get as close to the net. And then, as you said, the ball bounces higher. It's this trajectory that keeps the ball low. And then your opponent, you get 50% of your pace approximately from the pace of the incoming ball. This is, again, a repeat that, Navratilova won Wimbledon 9 times, and it's hard for a tennis group to name 9 players who could play a one-handed backhand approach shot since she's retired.
That's right. Well, I remember when I was learning how to be a player, I played this guy, and I'm serving and volleying a lot, and he always made his approach shots short and down the middle. Like they would hit just past the service line and softly, and I have to run up and pass him from that thing. I thought, oh my God, there's more of this game than I knew.
Yeah, I think the rackets,
you don't see.
it's Chris Clore. I steal lines. He goes, yeah, the kid's just trying to launch missiles. That's what they're doing. Is that I asked a little 8-year-old girl who's here from Connecticut. She's working hard, got a lot better, and I go, what do you like better, speed or spin? Speed. Well, you don't have a driver's license yet. Why don't you just go with spin? Let's see, just spin your ground strokes in the court. But the racket, Pete Sampras, he was asked if his son, I believe Christian's his first name, if he had taken up tennis, what would you do? He'd make him play with a wooden racket, where because they're not blasting balls with.
Yeah, you have to learn to play with a wooden racket.
So
no freebies
for the growth of with racket stats. You think the best thing to do would be have teaching pros. They need to be your ally. They need to be knocking on doors and making phone calls and getting parents to say, go do this.
But they're like, I'm not trying to be condescending, but they're very stubborn, like farmers. And you approach them and say, hey, I'd like to show you this way of you using analytics in your program to, help out with the kids and get, possibly get the parents involved, et cetera. And no, thanks. No, we don't do that. I mean, it's just like, okay, that we're at that point. So between me and my social media team here in the last couple of weeks, we've decided that we're going to go for parents of tennis players. They will usher in the level of analytics, and the pros will be forced to learn how to use it. And eventually, some of them will catch on when they, there's that learning curve, where it goes very flat and all of a sudden it shoots up in terms of usage, purchasing of products. And we're on that real slow incline right now. And then all it takes is a couple key people to start using it, and all of a sudden influencers, and boom, then everybody's going to say, oh my God, why haven't I been using that? That sort of thing. I'm going to be a bee and just pollinate. But my focus in social media will be on parents and families, because that's what this is built for. And also I'm going to try to meet with pros, go to pro events, PTR conference, USPTA conference, and that sort of thing, stuff that I can get to, and maybe have a booth or something where I can explain a little bit more to them. And I see over the next 2 or 3 years that it's going to catch fire. There just is too much good in it not to have it catch fire.
No, that's great. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm just seeing this army of parents. I mean, that's why you said you're introducing to coaches, and coaches said that involve parents, and I think that's already kind of pushback. And I see army of parents coming in with those red flags to coaches. Hey, what is going on in here? So I think the coaches are sometimes scared of that too.
Well, I think one thing with the parents, I agree with you and your social media team, is that the parents should be the boss. I mean, there should be the architect. They write the checks.
Yep.
And the parent, they need to be educated, though. They need to have consumer knowledge. And it's racket stats. Maybe it goes with rocket science. It's maybe there's some type of marketing slogan or some catchphrase for those two things. It's not rocket science. I mean, there's only 4 places you can miss. I tell people, if you lose 6-3, 6-3, and you listen to me, I'm pretty sure I can get you to win the match, because we're just going to have you, when you're on the baseline, you are not missing wide. We tell people, if you miss long, it's a misdemeanor. You have to explain that to them. Your parents have got a misdemeanor. They were driving a little bit too fast, coming off the freeway onto a residential road, but your parents haven't got a felony. Your parents haven't stolen a car. But if you're behind the baseline and you're missing wide. And then also, too, if you Vic Braden, just throw one ball up the middle to see like their forehand or backhand. They sidestep it, and they'll tell you what side they like better. But we tell people at the very beginning, We have a voluntary tape with Agassiz, like a 16-year-old kid. He says, this is an offensive shot. Just arc one ground stroke, and then they're going to back up. Ball's going to be above their shoulder. Then you can go on offense. So it's a 1-2 punch. And with that, today, kids don't volley. I'm going, you throw a ball up high and they run backwards. Like, how can you lose that kid? I mean, come on. They just, all you got to do is hit high and deep, and they don't even volley. And just don't miss wide. But it's, it's almost like the baseball home run derby. There's no home runs in tennis. I mean, all they're trying to do is hit the ball Mach 10. But I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with parents. We have a system of systems. I mean, and Bill Jacobson is one of our pillars. We mentioned Jim Lair and Jim Verdick, Peter Burwash. I mean, I think we've mentioned all of them tonight. Vic Braden, Dennis Vandermeer, Hopman's name came up. And we're just trying to give out content, but with charting, we have kids, and it's it sounds like doom and gloom and being pessimistic. They played 4 years of college tennis at a big time school with a big time budget, and they haven't been charted one time.
Yeah,
haven't even been videoed one time.
Even though they have the $100,000 setups.
No, I mean
the video.
Yeah, you go. I was at UNC Charlotte. I'm not sure exactly. I was doing a workshop a couple weekends ago, and not sure what they're doing as a team. They were nice enough to let this outfit tennis block. They hosted the workshop, and yeah, they had a camera on 12 beautiful outdoor courts, beautiful facility. And I know the students are busy, but it's just like, well, what we've been doing with players is, send us. We've done it live with college streaming. Just send us the match, and what we'll do randomly is just take 15 minutes 3 different times during the match, and then just send that to you. And then because on the other end, I mean, 45 minutes is a long time with a kid who's got a lot of college work to do. But a kid plays big time college basketball, for example, football as well. They're not going to play 1 minute and then not have that analyzed. The old Vince Lombardi, Jerry Kramer instant replay. We won on Sunday, and the late Max McGee, they come out, and he was the jokester, and you go, I thought we won that game. Because they just go through the mistakes that they make. How can people get a hold of you?
Info at racketstats.com.
Ilja's from Lafayette. What's the name of the billionaire from Lafayette who's like the highest ranked player?
Gulbis.
Yeah, maybe Gulbis is interested. You have to have somebody. My mother used to say that money doesn't take care of all things, but it certainly helps with most things. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, and you can lead a lifestyle like you and I have led, and you probably won't become a millionaire. Or one of the kids I used to teach was a very good player, played at Penn State, and ended up years ago when hotels had keys that you had to get in. Well, this company came along and they had these cards that you could slip in that we use all the time now. Anyway, after college, he couldn't get a job, so he taught tennis part-time, and he did that. Anyway, he had a degree in finance, and he ended up handling the Atlanta Teachers Union's what do you want to call it? Their nest egg. And in 6 years, he made enough money that he quit. And he says, I worked like hell for those 6 years. But he says, I'll never have to work again. Now I can do what I really want to do. So I guess there are two ways of approaching it.
Yeah. But no, I think it's so admirable. Tennis really needs help. And I think that I know if people get a better start, Braden is no substitute for a good start. And if people just realize, okay, Braden, the tennis court's a mistake center. But let's show you what the mistakes are. At least begin with the mistakes. And I like what you said about racket stats. Is if someone's missing their forehand, then they take that to the pro. And I think another thing too about pushing it along with parents is tennis has its challenges because like a basketball team, volleyball team, baseball team, you go on, they're not going to go to a match, a game, and the coach is not going to be there. I think that many, many times a junior tennis player, and fair enough, the coach, there's, the different genders, the different age groups, different levels, and their junior development programs going in every which way for tournaments. But I think most of the time it's like a sailboat without a rudder, is that there's nobody there at the tournament. And then I think also too, I think one thing about parents is, the parent doesn't want to be the tennis parent from hell, yelling and screaming. So I think a lot of times parents don't, they're afraid of taking that role of being the heavy. But I don't think it's being the heavy. You've got to get more balls centered. And it's amazing how most kids, they just go for the open court. They go for the open court from the wrong position of the court. And then, again, another thing that comes up on our podcast all the time is the connection between the bench and the brain. In the other sports, the coach has the power of saying, "Hey, kid, you're sitting on the bench. We'll put you back in when you stop doing this." That's so powerful. But tennis parents listening, I mean, it's like you're just crossing your fingers and hope your kid's going to make some changes, and they don't. And it's not forehands and backhands. It's, just, okay, what about my forehand? It's like it's your logic, it's your understanding of the game overall, singles and doubles.
Well, and if a parent is involved in getting any sort of data, it puts them in perspective as well. So they understand that, okay, this is a normal stat, and my kid is here and there. But so instead of jumping on them and saying, "Oh, why did blah blah blah," and all that, they start saying, well, they get educated, their tennis IQ goes up, and so many of them are not tennis players. So they're learning from rote, and they're looking at other parents do things, and they're learning from them, which is worse. But then with analytics, they can go out there, and eventually they understand the coach can say, well, this is normal, this isn't, here are the red flags, green flags, and here's what we're working on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of these 2 or 3 things over the next few weeks. And when they play a practice match, like you need to pay little Johnny over here, who's one of our other students, and he will chart the match for you, and they'll give me the results, and I'll send them to you, that sort of thing. And I can see a big cooperation amongst the serious parents and the serious players. Now, if they're just in there because they have to be, then this isn't going to happen, but that's not our market.
Yeah, I think if it was a reading level, if some kids in the 9th grade and their parents are told they have a 4th grade reading level, I repeat myself all the time, but the light at the end of the tunnel for most tennis players is not the way out. It's a train coming right at them. I mean, the sooner people get a dose of honesty, like, no, you really don't have a serve, and and it's science. Certainly there's always room for new findings, but the understanding of how to hit a forehand or backhand, if people do their homework like you have, especially in this area of stats, you need to be educated. And I think what you're doing, those are the people say how to improve tennis, like education. The teachers and the coaches, they need to have, like Vandermeer used to say, you need to have, and his parents were missionaries, you need to have missionary zeal for practice. You need to have missionary zeal for stats, because stats tell you what to practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a whole world, and anybody who gets involved in it, it's just like, wow, this is a neat tool. I can do this with it. And eventually, the more they use it, the more they understand they can mess around with it and experiment during practices and get the players to understand what their game really is. So when they don't cave under pressure, it's not the end all be all, but it's certainly a valuable tool that's not being used in tennis in general, except at the top level.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ilja.
Yeah, I just had a comment, a question, I guess, from your app, Racket Stats, that separates you from the rest. I mean, if you can talk more about the grades, and I mean, that's amazing that you guys simplified it for parents just to kind of see, okay, this is a red flag because, where my kid needs to be in, under 14 or under 16. I mean, you have this database. Do you want to talk? Can you talk more about that grades, how it comes up in the database? What's the numbers and how you putting it together, what the red flag is and green flag?
Well, I take the stat for the area, and I adjust it every couple of months because they don't change that much. First serve percentage today is about what it was when we played. I mean, it isn't a lot of difference. The serve speed can be faster and a little bit in general, but not by a long shot. So I take the stat and then I do a plus and minus a variation of 5% of that stat. And that's the average, what I term average. And anything that's 6% and higher or lower, whatever, is either not normal, and it's below average, or it's above average. And what we've done is not only do we give it a flag, but we're also in this next edition, we're going to have a grade, and the grade will be the same. It's going to be a green flag or a red flag. And at the end, up at the top, we have a little explanation of it. You know, the red flags are things that you should take a look at with your coach. The green flags mean you're doing well with it, and that sort of thing. Just a basic explanation of it. But that's how I come up with the stats and the variation is the 5% plus or minus for the average, and then it's either above or below. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just, some of it. I know that it's a combination of, on the forehands and ground, on the back and ground strokes. I mean, there was a combination of unforced errors to the winners and stuff. I mean, that's, I saw it along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, we called that the win-error ratio, and of course, I stole that from Bill. Yeah. We've changed all that. There are no more any win-error ratios, and I'm changing some of the descriptions of the actual statistics so they're a little bit more readable. You know, we took some shortcuts for space, and they haven't worked out. Parents don't understand it, so we're kind of changing the definition of some of the stats so that it makes it a little easier to understand. But the win-error ratio now will be a grade, and you're either at grade, green, or above grade, or below grade, or average. And that's what shows up on the condensed version right away. So they can spot red and green pretty quickly, and then they can focus on it if they want during the match, or they can wait till after the match. You as coaches, if you saw that, you start focusing on the match and say, well, okay, this is green. It's always been green. I'm not worried about that. But this red flag bothers me. Let's see why it is. And maybe it's because they're playing the lefty. Maybe it's because, they're playing somebody they're not accustomed to the style. It could be any number. And you can make notes. So you make a voice-to-text note on it. Oh, Johnny's not doing well on this because I think this is the issue. We need to take a look at it. And then you leave it at that, and then you go on to the next point. And at the end of the match, you have a total of how many times Johnny got into trouble with that shot. And so then you can present it to him and say, hey, let's take a look at this shot. On the other hand, you can take a stat that's marginally green, and because you use it so much, like a first serve or second serves to certain areas, it's marginally green, and you want to make it solidly green. So you say, well, being marginal, just slightly above average is no good. I don't like that. Let's get this thing a much stronger. So you can look at that, and based on your mentality as a coach, you can adjust any of these things any way you want.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I just wanted to talk about it. I mean, that's what really separates your app and from all other apps that are, on the phones that are out there. And it's really an educational content, because through the other apps, if you're not educated through the stats, I mean, I don't even know what I'm looking at, but this is really simplifying for, again, like I said, like parents, it gives them really like red, green. I mean, so no, this is great.
Yeah, you can't. I will hopefully, and if you have any suggestions, we're all ears, because we're always changing things based on feedback we get. One thing I've noticed today is that the feedback from kids and players particularly is nil. It's nothing. You don't get any feedback. Okay. Even on parents, you don't get much feedback, and I think it's because they're embarrassed that they think that maybe the answer is simpler than it really is, but they should be asking questions like you just asked. Why? Why green? Why red? What's the big deal? But they're afraid to ask. So we got two communication problems that are, and it's not facing me. This is facing Swing Vision. Is facing Warren at Tennis Analytics. It's just like you got all this stuff, and it's neat. But until the parent or the coach really understands it, it's useless, and it actually is frustrating. I talked with the coach at Stanford now, Goldman, and he used tennis analytics for 6 months. And I said, "How'd that go?" And he said, "We couldn't do it." He says, "It's too time consuming. We don't have enough kids to do it, blah, 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 blah," like that. And I said, "Well, what's right?" He says, "No, we just don't have the time, and kids are too busy, blah, 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 blah," like that. And he was actually a student of Compu-Tennis at one point. So he knows about it, but the situation that he was in made it too difficult to get all these people. Whereas Dick Gould, and we're going back a long ways, but Dick Gould actually found people to volunteer out of the mathematics department, I believe, because he wanted people that understood numbers. And he got them to do all the stats for his use. But it's not as easy to do that today.
I'll tell you a story of Compu-Tennis. Tyler Junior College, still to this day, they have a very strong junior college tennis team, both men and women. And I was there throughout the 80s, so I was there for 3 different coaches. And John Peterson, the last coach, he was very successful, but I recommended Craig Tiley, and he was not even interviewed. He was there 7 years, and from there he went on and he won the NCAAs at Illinois. So I think he would have done okay. I remember Peterson asking me one time, "Well, who'd you recommend?" I said, "Tiley." He goes, "Oh, I think he would have done okay." But why I mentioned that is that we certainly had an army. We were training tennis teachers, but we every match was charted. Back then you would chart it with the Compu-Tennis sheet and put it into a PC, and we were doing that. I did some work at NC State, and we went to the club team and say, okay, to give, to get, hey, we'll give, we'll help you out. And we had people from the club team charting matches. But then, I remember being with Bill in Hamburg and talking to him, Flack and Seguzo, they won their doubles in 5 sets, but, getting them to want to read the stats. That's just, it's amazing that it's great what you're doing, but it just has never really caught on in the tennis culture like it should have. But there certainly, back in the day with Braden and Vandermeer and their leadership, and then Bill Jacobson coming into that group, there definitely was a buzz at one point, but I like the fact
it was too expensive. It was too expensive and too inconvenient. No internet, no cell phones. And, and so they had the buzz, but they didn't have the internet. And now we got the internet, and there's the buzz is going to start out because it just takes a few people to keep it going. And I'm going to keep it going from my end on all fronts. We need to promote it because I think it's for the good of tennis. I'm being a little altruistic that way, but I really sincerely believe that once your kid starts playing tournaments at any level, even, level 8, you can start doing charting. And I'm actually working with a parent right now of a kid who's at a level 8. They're terrible, but we're giving dad something to do, and we're getting them focused on the major parts of her game. So it works at all levels.
No, and it helps a relationship too, because it takes the emotion out of it. Here are the facts. Yeah. This is where you have to get better.
Yeah. I don't have to yell at you anymore. You can figure it out yourself.
But in tennis, it's not like some of the mistakes. In some sports, they blow the whistle. You're offside, like blow the whistle, stop. In tennis, the mistakes are just rampant. They just keep on coming, and it's just next point, and it's just repeated. But Andy,
when you consider that the best player in the world can only win like 51% of the points, it's like, whoa. So it teeters very dynamically. Listen, I want to also say if you run into anybody who knows Bill or knew of him or worked with him, I have submitted his nomination to the Hall of Fame up in Rhode Island. And all you got to do is send an email to him just supporting what you know about Bill or tell a story or whatever. They are interested in character references, and of course, Bill was perfect for that, as well as background or any stories that go along with it to support his nomination. I'd appreciate that.
No, and once again, you send the email to the International Tennis Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
Okay. Is anyone in particular to, we actually have Sophia Patel helping us out. Now we have a large network, but we have to get it organized and try to have the network work together. But we have all sorts of people that, that we've trained, and if they've gone through our training, they're indebted. We all are to what Bill Jacobson did for tennis.
Well, Stan Smith, Fred Stolle, you're talking about the top players, Chris Evert. You see, and a lot of those players you can't reach unless you have somebody who knows them. And I don't have contacts. I sent Billie Jean to Billie Jean Enterprises a request and let her know that I would appreciate her, because she was in business with him and she worked with him, appreciate her comments to the International Hall of Fame. I haven't heard, because, trying to get through to her is like trying to get up Mount Rushmore. It's crazy. So anybody that I'm just putting out the broadcast. Anybody knows, be greatly appreciated, certainly by Bill, who doesn't even know about it.
Yeah, classy guy, smart guy, did so much for tennis. And so are you. We could just hear your enthusiasm, your spirit, and your voice. And we'll try to help you out with your project as well. But thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. This is an honor. And you and I finally have time to get together, huh?
Yeah. We need to follow up on this. We're trying to do the same thing, more on the forehand, backhand, and helping people develop solid fundamentals. We have the name GreatBase. One of our students at tennis needs a GreatBase initiative. Maybe we should have called it Solid Fundamentals. But that's another thing too, is that, and I don't think that the analytics, the numbers for grip, swing, and body, like a Bradenism, you turn the racket 8 times, so it's 360 degrees. So you divide 360 by 8. Every time a kid moves that knuckle by 1 bevel, it's 45 degrees. So, the tennis math, and exactly that's what you're doing with stats is tennis math, and I think it's very altruistic to what you're doing, and certainly we support your efforts and we'll try to help out.
Well, likewise, anything I can do for you guys, love to get together with you. What a team you've got assembled!
Well, thanks.
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
But you've always had a good team.
Yeah, it's how's it go? Together, everyone accomplishes more. We have to still organize the team, and that's where, it's not that expensive as well. But everybody's so busy. I think time poverty is. Days go by so fast. How's it go? Days are long and decades are short. But no, I just again appreciate having you as a guest and appreciate what you're doing for tennis. Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it as well. And thanks to the lads behind the team.
Yeah, well, our podcast team, Ivan Osterets, I'm certainly an amateur. I mean, what do I know about? I always say everybody and their brother has a podcast, but Ivan is the one who makes the podcast go. And but it's great to have Ilja sit at the table. We're going to do a podcast with Ilja in the next few days. But actually, to talk to someone for yourself, it's we're getting close to the 3-hour mark, marathon. But with that, if people take, if it's 1% of your week, so you just listen 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and you certainly have shared so many, as we say, golden nuggets for the tennis treasure chest.
Well, I think there are people out there who understand that when they talk to people like us that have had all this experience and stuff, and you and I both came up through the mad rush of tennis all the way up to where it is now. So we basically have seen, I don't want to say seen it all, but we've had a chance to be part of it. And I feel sorry for the younger pros today, because you cannot get involved in the game the way we did. You can't get, we used to go out and you could walk on, Chris Evert would walk off and you go talk to her. Now you can't get within a country mile. Everything has gotten so sophisticated, and it's also, I think, almost intimidating for younger pros. Like, oh my God, this is like, way over my head. Well, it isn't. And all of us all of us were terrible once. All of us, none of us grew up playing tennis, from the age of 3. We all learned gradually. We made the mistakes, but we had a chance to do that. I don't think pros have that chance as much anymore.
Well, I think there was more spirit to learn and serve, under mentors. And, I think today a lot of people don't want to teach beginners. We get some people upset with us as we don't like people being at the tournaments handing out business cards the kids can already play. We call that the third base coaches. We need more first base coaches. And we need to have people start with a better beginning in tennis. And, that obviously that's one. Simplification is sophistication, what you're doing, get people started with charting. And, that's like anything. They have to get started. Once they get started, then all of a sudden it's like anything. If you want to be good at the piano, you got to sit at the piano. If you want to be good at charting matches, you have to chart matches. I think laziness is a side of it. I know with Jim Verdick, I was fortunate to have him be a guest at my house and spend so much time with him. He charted matches. He would, if he's watching the U.S. Open, like I was watching with a group of people the other day, Indian Wells, he's going to chart it. We tell kids, we take it with Bill Jacobson, the basically a point ends 3 ways: plus plus, minus f, minus minus, and you make a T chart. And we ask kids, you can just do it on YouTube. Now I'm down to 10. If I walk through your house, because most of our students come to visit, they're sent here by, fellow coaches, people that we've trained, and we say, okay, do you have a clipboard? And if I walk through your house and I'm in the TV room, is there a clipboard with this charting sheet? And, like a kid will go 5 years and have you served and volleyed once in those 5 years? And the answer is no. And it's just mind-boggling. And then, it's even worse. If you charted at all, if you ever charted a match. And now you and I remember when Wimbledon, we'd watch it tape delayed. Wimbledon didn't come to us live. I remember Jimmy Connors, Arthur Ashe, 1975. That was not shown live in America. And so now it's, we have so much, but in some ways we have so little. We have to, we have to put Jim. I guess we could say with what Jim Verdick said is, put your brains down, and that and Bill Jacobson, brainiac. Smart guy, and I think that's carrying the torch from the past. He shined a bright light on tennis, and I appreciate you taking his name to the Hall of Fame for sure.
Well, good. Let's stay in touch a little bit more than we have in the last 15 years.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Andy. Good night. Thanks again for your time. Great.
Thank you.
And thank you, guys. Thank you, Yvonne.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Adios.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Wow. What enthusiasm. What spirit. We're at the 3-hour mark. Yeah, Yvonne, give me the high five. With, so many takeaways from that. But again, people need to go take it, and it's education. Comment?
Whoa. No, a lot of golden nuggets, and it's amazing to talk to somebody again passionate about tennis, and again energy creates energy. It's amazing. It's pumped.
We're a small time operation with we very seldom mention fundraising, but you go to our website if you're interested in supporting the GreatBase. But with that, we will continue to try to keep giving out free educational content. But that was, I think, a fantastic conversation. Good night. Adios, amigos.
All right. Thank you.